A poor girl rescues a man lying injured at the foot of the mountain, without knowing he's a hidden billionaire, and what he does later completely transforms her life. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Grace knew these mountains better than anyone else in her small, close-knit town. From the time she was 8, she had been climbing, hiking, and guiding travelers through steep inclines and treacherous trails to help support her father's struggling carpentry business. While most kids played games after school, Grace learned to follow weather patterns and read the mountain's many moods. By adulthood, she was considered the best local guide, respected by both villagers and tourists for her calm, steady approach and her unmatched knowledge of the area's hidden routes. In those rugged peaks, rumors spread quickly whenever a stranger arrived. The day Michael Bennett walked into Grace's favorite cafe, no one recognized him as a billionaire from the city. He wore faded hiking boots, the kind that had seen better days, and a heavy jacket that looked more functional than fashionable. No one would guess that this tall, athletic man with windblown hair was heir to a massive technology empire. Certainly not Grace, who was quietly nursing a cup of tea in the corner, listening to the wind howl beyond the windows. "Excuse me?" he asked the cafe owner that morning. "Who might be willing to guide me to the northern slopes?" His voice was confident, but also carried a weight of loneliness that made Grace glance up. The cafe owner eyed Michael up and down. "Northern slopes are dangerous," he said, "especially with a storm predicted. We don't like risking it, but there is Grace." He gestured to the young woman quietly finishing her tea. "If anyone takes you, it'll be her." Grace raised an eyebrow, studying this newcomer. She was used to tourists who came unprepared, drawn by the mystique of the mountains but ignorant of the real dangers. Still, his tone was polite, his eyes earnest. She stood and gave a slight nod. "If you want to climb that way," she said, "we'll need to leave soon before the wind picks up. I expect you have the right gear?" Michael's lips curved into a smile. "I believe so," he answered, "but I trust your judgment more than mine." Something about his sincerity put her at ease. She decided not to question him too much, at least not in front of the curious eyes inside the cafe. It was not unusual for Grace to guide clients who kept quiet about their true backgrounds. Some were wealthy city dwellers seeking a taste of adventure, others simply amateurs who wanted the thrill of a story to share. But Michael's quiet humility disarmed her. He wasn't bragging about prior climbing feats, nor was he complaining about the cold. If anything, he seemed determined to test himself against the mountain. And so, with a checklist of what they would need, she made plans for them to leave the following morning. The next day at dawn, Grace met Michael by the rickety wooden bridge that led to one of the lower trails. The sun was still hidden behind the peaks, and a thick frost glistened on every stone. Michael carried a backpack that looked worn but sturdy. He mentioned he'd hiked smaller mountains in the past, though nothing as formidable as these. Grace nodded, once again noting how he spoke with no hint of arrogance. "Keep close to me," she instructed. "The northern slopes are unpredictable. If you fall behind or if the weather worsens, we'll turn back." Her voice was calm but firm, revealing the authority of an experienced guide. Michael followed dutifully. Higher and higher they climbed, the morning sunlight barely touching the sides of the cliffs. The air turned sharper, the wind picking up speed. Despite the chill creeping into her gloves, Grace felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. She always did, each time she ventured into these paths. She loved the quiet hush of untouched snow, the jagged outlines of ancient rocks carved by centuries of storms. That was why she became a guide. This was her world, more so than the bustling markets of her village or the handful of shops on the main street. As they trudged onward, Michael occasionally asked questions about the best route in winter, about the wildlife, about how Grace had come to know these mountains so well. She spoke of her childhood, how she used to sell small carved trinkets her father made to tourists, how she climbed half the time just to chase away the sorrow of her mother's passing. Though she didn't share every personal detail, her words were more open than usual. Something about Michael's thoughtful curiosity made her feel safe enough to talk. Midway through the day, heavy clouds rolled across the sky. The wind turned violent, carrying a bite that stung their faces and nearly forced them to crouch behind large boulders for shelter. Grace's instincts screamed that they should turn back, but Michael seemed determined. He insisted he'd be fine, that he wanted to press on just a little farther, to see a viewpoint he'd heard about where the entire valley lay below like a tapestry of greens and browns. They continued carefully, Grace scouting ahead. She anchored ropes, found footholds, tested every ledge. "Just stay where I step," she told Michael. "Don't shift your weight too quickly if the ground is loose." She could feel his trust in every motion behind her. Yet as they neared a tricky section of rock, she heard a crack, like ice snapping underfoot. She spun around just in time to see him lose his balance on a hidden patch of slick, melting snow. He slid several feet before managing to grab a jut of rock, but his position looked precarious. One wrong move and he would plunge into a steep ravine. Grace rushed to him, adrenaline pounding in her veins. She dropped to her belly, ignoring the bitter cold seeping into her clothes. Carefully, she tossed him one end of a rope anchored around her waist, urging him to grab it. "Don't look down, Michael. Just focus on me. Reach for the rope." His face was pale, shock evident in his eyes, but he remained calm. Inch by inch, he edged closer, guided by her voice. Finally, she managed to loop the rope under his arm, and with a strength that belied her slender frame, she pulled him to safety. They both lay there in the snow, breathing heavily. After a few moments, Michael gave a shaky laugh. "You must think me a complete fool," he said, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. Grace shook her head. "No one's immune to these mountains. Even the best climbers can slip. We'll head back now. The storm's getting worse, and it's not safe." Michael looked up at the bruised sky, noticing the swirling gray clouds heavy with snow. He nodded in agreement, but as they tried to retrace their steps, the weather turned even more brutal. An icy gale whipped around them, and within minutes, flurries of snow fell thick and fast. Grace realized with growing concern that they would not make it down before dark. "We have to find shelter," she shouted over the howling wind. "There's an abandoned ranger's outpost about an hour from here, near the ridge. Can you keep moving?" Michael nodded, though she could see the strain on his face. Determined, she led him across rocky terrain now slick with fresh ice. The temperature plummeted so sharply that each breath felt like knives in their lungs. Grace's heart thumped with worry for her client, and an odd concern that went beyond the usual guide-customer bond. When the outpost came into view, an old cabin of stone and timber, Grace nearly sighed with relief. They forced the half-broken door open and collapsed onto the dusty floor. The place smelled of damp, and a bitter cold seeped through cracks in the walls. Still, it was better than braving the blizzard outside. As darkness fell, Grace managed to find dry wood stored in a corner. She coaxed a small flame to life in the ancient fireplace, its embers flickering against the gloom. Michael, shivering, offered to help, but she told him to rest. "You hit that rock harder than you think," she said, motioning to the bruise on his temple. "Let me just see if you're okay." She examined him by the light of the newly lit fire, gently brushing aside his hair to check for any swelling. Her touch was firm but tender. In that intimate moment, Michael felt a wave of gratitude he couldn't express. With a half smile, he said softly, "Thank you, Grace. You saved my life today." Grace's cheeks warmed, and not just from the fire. She wasn't sure why those words struck her so deeply. "I'm just doing my job," she murmured. "Anyway, you'd have done the same for me, right?" He nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Outside, the wind howled like a hungry beast, rattling the shutters and piling snowdrifts against the walls. They were officially trapped. Grace knew from experience that if this storm didn't break by morning, they could be stuck here for days. The thought unsettled her, but she tried to remain calm. She found some dried rations left behind by previous hikers, barely enough for a meal, and split them evenly with Michael. As the night wore on, the flames cast flickering shadows across the stone walls. To keep their minds off the cold, Grace and Michael spoke in hushed voices, sharing small pieces of their lives. She told him about the lonely hillside cottage where she grew up, her father's kindness, her mother's tragic passing. Michael listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. When she asked about his life, he hesitated. He said he was a teacher, traveling alone to reconnect with nature. She found it curious. There was a certain refinement in his speech, a confidence that felt more polished than one might expect from a modest schoolteacher. But she let the thought go, attributing it to her own imagination. Eventually, exhaustion overcame them. Curled beside the dwindling fire, Grace prayed silently the storm might abate by sunrise. She watched Michael doze off, his breath calm, his brow creased only slightly from the day's ordeal. She reminded herself he was just another client who needed her help. Still, she couldn't quiet the flutter in her chest when she remembered his words of thanks. Little did Grace know, that moment by the fire was a turning point. By saving the life of a man she thought was a simple traveler, she had set into motion events that would change her own future forever, leading her from the humble trails she knew into a world of wealth and power far beyond her dreams. The next days would reveal startling truths about Michael Bennett, truths that would test her courage and her heart like never before. A thin morning light seeped through cracks in the outpost's wooden shutters, barely illuminating the dim interior. Grace stirred awake, finding herself curled near the fireplace's dying embers. Her back ached from the makeshift bed, and the cold nipped at her cheeks. Across from her, Michael was still asleep, his breath steady, though his forehead creased in a slight frown. She wondered if he was dreaming of the near disaster on the ledge the day before. The storm had not abated overnight. Wind whistled around the cabin, buffeting the walls with an intensity that made the timbers groan. Occasionally, a draft of frigid air slipped through the door's edges and snuffed the last hints of warmth. Grace rose quietly, draping an extra blanket over Michael so he wouldn't wake in a chill, then checked their supply of firewood. They didn't have much left, certainly not enough for days on end. If the storm continued, they would be in trouble. Yet as she knelt by the small pile of logs, she recalled that it wasn't the first time she'd faced hardship in these mountains. Where others panicked, Grace found resilience. Outside, snow was falling thick and fast, layering drifts higher against the windows. She squinted through a gap in the shutters, seeing nothing but a white haze. Were it not for the building's sturdy stone walls, she doubted they could have survived the night's brutal gusts. After carefully adding a fresh log to the fireplace, she knelt and blew on the embers. Flames sprang to life, flickering over the new wood with a crackle. The soft light and warmth eased a knot of tension in her chest. At least for the moment, they were safe. Not long after, Michael stirred. He sat up, blinking at the room's faint glow and rubbing his temple where the bruise from his fall had darkened. "Is it morning?" he asked in a low voice, as though unwilling to disturb the silence. Grace gave a short nod. "Such as it is. Not that we can see much with the storm still raging. How are you feeling?" A grimace flitted across his face as he tested his range of motion. "Sore but grateful to be alive. I owe you everything." Grace smiled gently, recalling how close he'd come to tumbling into the ravine. "I do what I can. But let's just say I'm glad I was there in time." Michael tried to stand and swayed slightly, steadying himself against the wall. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked, noticing her rummaging through the cabin's corners. She was checking for any overlooked provisions, maybe a can of dried soup or a half-empty jar of something left behind by rangers from seasons past. "Sit," she insisted, though not unkindly. You can make yourself useful by not aggravating that injury. Just keep the fire going if you can. I'll see what else we have to eat." She found a small trunk near a rickety table. Inside lay a tangle of rope, some rusted climbing gear, and, to her relief, a battered metal tin labeled coffee. She tapped it gently, hearing dried grounds rattle inside. It was hardly a full meal, but a warm drink would be a welcome comfort. Next to it, she discovered 2 more ration bars, still sealed in crinkly plastic. Though not exactly gourmet fare, they'd keep the 2 of them going for another day. While Grace organized their meager supplies, Michael fed the fire. Wisps of smoke curled up the chimney. His face looked pale but determined, as though he wanted to prove he could be of assistance. He was no ordinary client. Grace had guided many hikers, but rarely had she felt such an inexplicable pull of empathy towards someone she barely knew. Something about Michael's quiet demeanor, his readiness to trust her in a perilous situation, made her watch him more closely than she'd intended. "Here," she said softly, handing him a ration bar. She placed the battered coffee tin near the heat, mixing a little snowmelt water in a dented pot to brew a makeshift beverage. "It's not exactly a king's breakfast, but it'll do." Michael's gratitude shone in his eyes. "Tastes like a feast to me," he replied, biting into the bar. It was tough and flavorless, but he chewed it as though it were the best thing in the world. As they huddled by the fire, sipping steaming tin cup coffee, Grace finally asked, "Do you think someone might come looking for you?" Her tone was polite, but behind it lay genuine curiosity. "Family or friends, perhaps?" Michael took a moment to answer. "I'm not sure," he said. "I didn't exactly leave a detailed itinerary with anyone." The slight pause before anyone made Grace suspect there was more to the story. But she reminded herself that not every client wanted to share personal details. Maybe he truly was just a lone teacher on holiday, seeking solace in the mountains. "What about you?" he ventured. "Will your family worry?" Grace shook her head. "I live alone these days. My father passed recently. I have no siblings and, well, I guess the entire town is like family in a way, but they also know me. They know I'm cautious and can handle myself." She cast a glance out the window again, her breath fogging the glass. "Still, if we're not back soon, folks will suspect something's wrong and might send a rescue team. The local rangers check the passes whenever we have a blizzard like this." Michael nodded. "That might be our best bet, holding tight until help arrives." He hesitated, then asked, "But do you think we can last that long in this place?" Grace exhaled, letting the warmth of the coffee settle in her chest. "We don't have much food, but we have enough for a couple of days. The bigger concern is staying warm. We'll try to gather more wood, but if the storm doesn't ease soon, we might have to ration the fire. We'll do shifts, sleeping in turns to keep an eye on the flames." He agreed without argument, and they laid out a rough plan for the day. Grace insisted on checking around the perimeter for firewood or anything else salvageable. Despite Michael's desire to help, she wouldn't risk him aggravating his bruised ribs and head. Grabbing her coat and gloves, she ventured out. Snow and secrets. The wind blasted her the moment she unlatched the door. Icy flakes stung her face like needles. She trudged around the outpost, boots crunching through knee-deep drifts. Through the thick veil of white, the terrain looked alien, transformed overnight into a barren wasteland of swirling snow. She spotted a small woodshed behind the cabin, its door off the hinges. Inside, she found a few warped planks and half a broken stool, enough to burn for an extra hour or so if they rationed carefully. A sudden gust nearly knocked her off balance. She pressed a gloved hand to her hood, heart pounding. The storm's ferocity made it dangerous to be outside. As she hurried back, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Michael Bennett was off. He was physically capable, sure, but the look in his eyes sometimes betrayed a man used to giving orders, used to having the final say, far different from the typical manner of a small-town schoolteacher. Yet he acted humble, seemingly content to follow her lead. Shaking the thought away, Grace stumbled back inside. "Not much out there," she reported, dumping the damp wood near the fireplace. "1 or 2 more logs worth of burn." Michael set aside the coffee tin. "It's better than nothing." Then, concerned, he reached out a hand to steady her. "You're trembling." The uncharacteristic kindness in his voice made her chest tighten. She wasn't used to others tending to her. Typically, on these expeditions, she was the caretaker, the guide, the one who solved every problem. But now, with supplies dwindling, cold air biting through her coat, and a new sense of vulnerability creeping in, she realized how desperately she wanted them both to get out safely. "I'll be fine," she murmured, removing her gloves. Her fingertips were red and numb. Michael helped rub warmth back into her hands. She inhaled shakily, half from the cold, half from the strange comfort of his touch. They spent the hours that followed in hushed conversation, occasionally lapsing into companionable silence. Michael, perhaps eager to divert attention from himself, turned each of Grace's questions around, pressing her gently about her upbringing and how she'd learned such impressive survival skills. Hesitant at first, she eventually told him stories of learning to fish in freezing streams, of skiing down slopes as a child before she could properly walk, of helping lost hikers when she was barely a teenager. Something about sharing those memories felt right. Later in the afternoon, they heard a faint rumble overhead, almost like helicopter blades. Hope surged in Grace's chest. She scrambled to the door, yanking it open, only to see whiteout conditions. If a rescue chopper was searching, it wouldn't see the cabin's roof beneath the swirling snow. She tried waving, shouting, even though she knew how futile that was against the howling wind. Eventually, the noise faded, swallowed by the storm. Defeated, she closed the door. "They may come back," Michael offered, seeing her disappointment. "They'll realize we couldn't have vanished without a trace. They'll circle again." Grace sighed, forcing a half-smile. "I know. It's just, this place feels more claustrophobic by the minute." She gestured around the musty interior. "And we don't know how long we can keep the fire going." Michael laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Hey, we'll manage. And if all else fails, I'll do something foolish to attract attention," he joked, trying to lift her spirits. She appreciated his attempt at humor, though the seriousness beneath it wasn't lost on her. That night, as they settled into a new rotation, one staying awake to watch the fire, the other trying to sleep, they found themselves drawn into deeper conversations. With the storm a constant roar outside, the outpost felt like a tiny world of its own, each of them reliant on the other to keep going. Grace listened as Michael described what teaching meant to him, shaping minds, witnessing that spark of understanding in a student's eyes. She believed him, yet also sensed an odd distance in his tone, as if the story were only partly his own. But she didn't press. If he had secrets to keep, it was his choice. Late into the night, however, his guard seemed to slip. She caught him staring at the flames, a pensive look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He turned, startled, then forced a soft smile. "Just thinking. Wondering about responsibilities I left behind. People who might be worried." "Ah," Grace said. "Family, after all?" He swallowed, glancing down. "Yes and no. Let's call them colleagues. It's complicated." His shoulders sagged a little. "If I disappear, it won't be long before they figure out something is up, but I'm not sure if that means we'll see help any sooner." Grace tilted her head, curiosity flaring. The slip of the word colleagues sent her mind buzzing with possibilities. Still, she reminded herself to be patient. "In that case, hopefully they'll send a search party more experienced than me," she teased lightly, hoping to break the tension. He chuckled. "Doubtful. You're pretty much a superhero on these slopes." The warmth in his compliment washed over her, soothing her lingering anxieties. She found herself smiling despite the precarious situation. Then, fighting off a wave of weariness, she shifted closer to the fire. "Get some rest," she told him. "Your watch is up in a couple of hours." Michael stood, preparing to lie down near his pack. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." His gaze lingered on her, an unspoken sincerity shining there. In the near dark, with only the glow of embers to see by, she managed a nod. "We'll be okay," she whispered, not entirely certain if she was reassuring him or herself. Hunger and Hope morning arrived with barely any improvement in the weather. They were down to half a ration bar each, and the coffee tin was nearly empty. The logs they'd scavenged were dwindling fast. Despite their predicament, the conversation flowed more easily, with small smiles shared whenever a half-joke or comforting word emerged. The sense of camaraderie they'd built was, in some way, a lifeline, binding them together in adversity. They tried to keep an eye, or rather, an ear, out for helicopters or any sign of rescue, but the storm showed no sign of relenting. By mid-afternoon, the flurries outside had turned to sheets of driving snow. It piled against the windowsills, threatening to seal them inside. Grace felt a twinge of genuine fear. She'd been in tight spots before, but never for so long without any clarity on when rescue might come. What if the search teams assumed she'd gone another route? Or Michael's contacts didn't know precisely where he'd gone? She prayed silently that her neighbors might notice her absence, guess she was in trouble, and alert the rangers. While they quietly discussed possible ways to signal for help, Michael's eyes flicked to the battered trunk that had once held the coffee tin. "I wonder," he mused aloud, "if there's something in there we overlooked. Flare, a mirror, anything that might help us catch a pilot's attention when the storm eases." Grace nodded, rummaging through the trunk again. She found old scraps of cloth, a handful of nails, and an ancient, tarnished metal mirror that had probably belonged to some hiker long ago. "It's small," she commented, "but it might reflect light if the sun ever comes out." "That's a start," he said, brightening. "We'll keep it handy." Time passed slowly. They alternated warmth near the fire to preserve wood. Every so often, Grace would gather her courage, crack the door open, and peer out. No improvement. It was on one such check, about midday on what she guessed was their third full day, that she heard a new noise overhead. She whipped her head back inside. "Helicopter!" she mouthed excitedly. Michael bolted upright. Together, they hurriedly braved the gale outside. Through the swirling snow, they caught a glimpse of a rescue chopper's lights flashing in the gray sky. But visibility remained poor. "Over here!" Grace screamed, her voice snatched by the wind. She fumbled for the little mirror, angling it at the helicopter's beacon, trying to reflect any glimmer of light. For a moment, it seemed futile. The aircraft hovered uncertainly as if scanning the ground. Then it shifted closer. Relief and terror mingled in Grace's chest. If the pilot couldn't find a safe approach, they might circle once more and leave. But fortune favored them. The helicopter slowly lowered, battling the gusts, until it was near enough that a rope ladder could be dropped. A rescue worker in a thermal suit signaled vigorously. Michael grabbed Grace's hand. "You first!" he shouted over the roar. She shook her head. "You're injured. You go." "No arguments!" He clasped her shoulders, guiding her toward the ladder. The storm battered them both, but Grace managed to secure her hold, her adrenaline spiking. Step by step, she climbed, oblivious to the sting of wind-driven ice. When she reached the open hatch, strong arms pulled her inside. Moments later, Michael followed. The helicopter lurched, battered by a fierce crosswind. Inside, the rescue worker helped them strap in. "You're lucky we saw that reflection!" he yelled, handing them blankets. Then his eyes flicked to Michael. "Mr. Bennett, are you all right, sir?" Grace blinked in surprise. "Sir?" She glanced at Michael, who looked mildly uncomfortable at the formal greeting. "I'm okay," he muttered. Thanks for coming." Confusion clouded Grace's mind, but the howling rotor blades prevented further conversation. She held tight as the helicopter ascended into the stormy sky, heart pounding with relief that they were finally free from that icy tomb. Yet one thought looped in her head. Why did the rescue worker call him Mr. Bennett, like he was someone important? Back at a small mountain hospital, paramedics whisked them both inside to check for frostbite, dehydration, and any other injuries. Grace insisted on waiting in the corridor when a nurse led Michael to a private exam room. She assumed he'd need to get stitches or have his ribs wrapped. When she peeked into the adjacent nurse's station, she overheard a snippet of conversation. "Can't believe that's Michael Bennett," one nurse whispered. "He's practically tech royalty. Didn't expect him to show up in these parts." "Yes," another chimed in. "Word is he's the Bennett heir. Must have gone off-grid. You know how these billionaires are. Thrill seekers." A jolt of shock raced through Grace. Billionaire? The man she'd fought through ice and snow to save was no mere teacher. She leaned against the wall, breath catching. Her mind replayed every odd detail of their time on the mountain. His polite but vague answers, his slip of calling them colleagues instead of family, his well-worn but expensive gear. It all made sense now. She had risked her life, guided him, bared fragments of her soul, and he had concealed his true identity. Part of her felt foolish, yet another part bristled at his deception. Had he thought she wouldn't help him if she knew, or had he just wanted anonymity? She remembered the relief on his face when she first agreed to guide him, the sincerity in his eyes by the outpost's fire. Could it all have been genuine? Caught in her own thoughts, Grace barely noticed the nurse tapping her shoulder. "Miss, the doctor wants to take a look at you too," she said. Grace nodded, forcing a smile. "Right, of course." She walked down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. She wasn't sure what to think or how to feel. The only certainty was that her life, once stable and predictable, had suddenly collided with the secrets and complexities of a billionaire's world. She recalled how just that morning, Michael's presence had comforted her in the deserted cabin. The man who shared ration bars and hope. Was he still the same person, or was there a gulf between Michael the traveler and Michael Bennett the tech magnate? One thing was certain. After the hospital released them, the mountain trails wouldn't be the end of their story. Whether she liked it or not, Grace now knew a side of him that no press release or corporate biography would ever reveal. And perhaps, somewhere under the wealth and power, Michael Bennett had found something in Grace that he, with all his resources, had never truly encountered. A genuine human connection forged in the stark, unforgiving wilderness. Their paths, once forced together by a storm, were about to merge in a far more complex landscape, one where formidable relatives, corporate empires, and hidden agendas might prove more treacherous than any icy ledge, and Grace, whether by fate or by choice, was already stepping across that threshold. The hospital's corridors buzzed with faint fluorescent light and hushed footsteps when Grace finally emerged from her checkup. Though she wore a heavy sweater over her still-damp clothes, a lingering chill had settled in her bones. After days trapped in the mountains, the smooth linoleum hallways and antiseptic smells felt surreal. But what rattled her most was the revelation that the quiet man she rescued was none other than Michael Bennett, a billionaire heir with a name that carried weight in circles she had never even imagined. She eased into a plastic chair by a vending machine, replaying the nurse's whispers in her mind. He's practically tech royalty. There had been no sign of that on the slopes, no flashiness, no entourage. Just a handful of simple gear and the faint sadness behind his smile. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, closing her eyes against the overhead lights. "Grace?" came a soft voice. She looked up, startled, and saw Michael standing there. He was dressed now in clean clothes the hospital staff must have provided, navy sweatpants and a plain t-shirt that did nothing to hide the bandages around his ribs. In the stark hospital lighting, his bruises looked more pronounced, yet he seemed relaxed, almost as if some invisible burden had slid from his shoulders. "How are you?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. He gave a small nod. "They wrapped my ribs. Nothing broken, just bruised, and, well..." He gestured to the light bandage on his temple. "Doctor says I'm lucky I didn't get a concussion worse than this." She stood up, arms folded, searching his face. A dozen questions pressed at her, but the simplest tumbled out. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" Michael's gaze fell. "I wasn't trying to lie," he said slowly. "But once I saw how freely you treated me, without agenda, without assumptions, part of me wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible." He paused. "I just needed to get away from everything. If you'd known my background from the start, you might have acted differently." Grace huffed a quiet, humorless laugh. "Acted differently? You mean bowed at your feet?" She immediately regretted her sharp tone, but the swirl of emotions, relief, curiosity, betrayal, tightened in her chest. "I'm not the sort to do that. I just don't like being misled." "I know. I'm sorry," he said. His sincerity was disarming. "You saved my life. Several times, in fact. And all I offered you were half-truths. It was unfair." She wanted to hold on to her annoyance, but the tension in his posture and the honesty in his eyes tugged at her. She recalled how he'd nearly died in that storm, how he'd done his best to help her gather firewood and keep the cabin warm. So many small moments that felt genuine. With a long, measured exhale, she nodded. "We can talk about it later. For now, I'm just glad we're both okay." Michael lifted a corner of his mouth in a faint smile. "Me too." Before they could say anything else, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. A short, well-dressed man in a tailored coat approached, flanked by two taller individuals in crisp suits. The short man carried himself with an air of polished efficiency. He spotted Michael and rushed forward, relief and mild panic warring on his face. "Sir, we've been searching everywhere," the man said breathlessly, looking Michael over as if verifying he was truly in one piece. Then, remembering himself, he added, "The board is in chaos without you. And your grandmother—" His voice trailed off ominously. Michael gave Grace an apologetic look before addressing the newcomer. "I'm all right, Bennett." It took Grace a second to realize this was the man's surname, not Michael's. How confusing. "We need to handle this carefully. Please lower your voice." The short man nodded, then flicked his gaze to Grace, curiosity evident. "You must be Miss Grace, yes?" She studied him warily. "Yes, that's me." "Thank you for protecting Mr. Bennett," he said formally. "Our entire organization is indebted to you." He extended a polite hand, but Grace hesitated. The weight of all this strangeness pressed on her. Suits, official thank yous, talk of boards and grandmothers. She shook his hand, but her mind reeled. Michael cleared his throat. "Grace, this is Andrew Bennett. No relation to me, ironically. He's an aide who handles my schedule and other matters." Andrew gave a polite bow, then pivoted as if wanting to whisk Michael away instantly. But Michael wasn't ready to depart yet. He cast a glance at Grace. "I want you to come with us." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Just for a few days," he clarified, exchanging a brief, meaningful look with Andrew. There are people I need to face, details about the company I need to handle, and I want to make sure you're recognized for what you did. Properly. Let me help with any medical bills, missed work, whatever you need." Grace shook her head, a swirl of protest forming. "That's not necessary. I'm fine. I just need to go home, check on my place, get back to my normal life." A normal life that suddenly felt as though it were spinning out of reach. Andrew stepped forward, voice hushed. "Miss, the press will swarm you once they find out your role in rescuing Mr. Bennett. It might be safer, at least in the short term, to accept Mr. Bennett's hospitality. We can offer accommodations away from the media." A private driver, secure lodging until the attention dies down. She frowned, not wanting to be anyone's charity case. But the mention of the press unsettled her. The local news alone might be a nuisance, let alone national coverage if it involved a billionaire mogul. She pictured reporters camping outside her small house, harassing her neighbors. The idea twisted her stomach. "I suppose—" She glanced at Michael. His eyes held no trace of the arrogance she might have expected from a man with wealth. Instead, there was a quiet plea. "It's your call," he said gently. "I just think it might be simpler, if only for a little while." Grace hesitated. The mountain trip had already upended her life. Maybe a short detour, staying out of the spotlight, was the best way to handle the aftermath. With a reluctant nod, she agreed. "All right, but just until things calm down." Relief washed over Michael's features. "Thank you. Andrew, can we arrange the car? And discreetly, please." Andrew dipped his head in affirmation. "Right away, sir." He motioned to the two suits behind him, who promptly set about finalizing hospital discharge forms, speaking in hushed tones to the staff. As they walked out of the hospital together, Grace felt as though she'd stepped onto a different planet. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows idled by the curb. Another smaller car followed it, presumably with more staff. She wondered if neighbors might see these imposing vehicles in front of her modest little home. Would that invite gossip or frustration? Michael, noticing her discomfort, offered a quiet reassurance. "We'll keep a low profile. I'm not interested in making a spectacle either." For a moment they shared a comradely smile, recalling the storm that once seemed the biggest problem they'd ever face. Inside the SUV, the seats were soft leather, and the windows were tinted so dark it felt like night. Grace forced herself not to gape, though it was a far cry from the battered Jeep she sometimes rented for guiding. She and Michael sat side by side in the second row while Andrew navigated from the front, tapping quickly on a tablet. "Your grandmother?" Andrew began quietly, twisting around to address Michael. "She's scheduled an emergency board meeting to discuss your disappearance. It's in 72 hours. We need to get you home, brief you on everything that's transpired, and figure out how to handle the upcoming press conference. There's also talk of a new product launch you were supposed to review." Michael's jaw tightened at the mention of his grandmother. "Of course there is," he muttered. He shot Grace a sideways glance, and she noticed the flicker of worry behind his eyes. "We'll deal with it." "You'll want to rest first," Andrew insisted. "We've prepared a penthouse suite at the Bennett Tower in the city. Security is on high alert. We can also accommodate Miss Grace in a separate suite or a private room, whichever she prefers." "Wait," Grace interjected. "Bennett Tower? In the city?" Her mind conjured images of skyscrapers and sleek glass facades, environments far removed from the rustic life she knew. "This is all very sudden." Michael's expression softened. "I know. I won't force you. If you decide tomorrow it's too much, I'll make sure you get a quiet place somewhere else, but I want you to have the option to see this through with me. You have a right to know what you've stepped into." Silence settled in the car. Grace stared out the tinted windows at the pine trees rushing past, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Days ago, her world had been about guiding travelers, hauling gear, and recounting local folk tales around campfires. Now she was in an expensive SUV with a man who wielded more power than she'd fathomed, yet still wore humility like a second skin. They stopped briefly by Grace's cottage on the outskirts of the village so she could grab a bag of clothes and ensure no pipes had burst in the freeze. Neighbors peered curiously from behind curtains at the strange vehicles. Michael stayed discreetly in the back seat, not wanting to stir more gossip. He did, however, crane his neck out the window enough to see the small house Grace called home, a modest, single-story structure with a sloping roof nestled among evergreen trees. She felt a pang, wondering what he thought of her simple life. "Ready?" Andrew asked when she returned to the car, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She nodded, breathing in the cold, crisp air one last time before sliding back inside. As the vehicle pulled away, a swirl of anxiety mixed with a hint of anticipation twisted in her gut. She was leaving behind the quiet mountain town for a place where suits and board meetings dictated the day. They drove for hours, descending from winding forest roads into wider highways. The sky turned a dusky purple, then black, as they reached the city. Towering buildings rose against the skyline, their windows glittering like constellations. Grace tried not to press her face to the glass in amazement. She'd been to a city a handful of times, but never to one so vast or opulent. Eventually, the SUV turned into a private underground garage, pulling to a smooth stop. When the door opened, a team of security personnel stood waiting under bright overhead lights. The transformation was instant. Michael, battered from his ordeal, stood a little straighter as if donning an invisible mantle of authority. Andrew and a security chief exchanged hushed updates about the board meeting, the press, a myriad of details Grace could barely follow. "Let's get you upstairs," Michael said gently to Grace, guiding her toward a private elevator. The panel slid open with a soft chime, revealing polished marble floors. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of the large B logo etched into the lobby walls. Bennett Tower was undeniably grand, far from the humble cabin that had sheltered them just days before. The elevator ride was swift and silent, carrying them to a top floor. When it opened, Grace stepped into a sprawling penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Plush furniture, abstract art, and gleaming fixtures screamed wealth. She paused in the entryway, feeling a sudden self-consciousness about her worn boots and travel-stained jacket. Michael frowned, noticing her hesitation. "It's just a place, Grace," he said quietly. "Don't let it intimidate you." But how could it not? Everything in sight looked astronomically expensive. She thought of her father's workshop, where he used second-hand tools to fix broken furniture, or her dusty bookstore a few blocks from her cottage that she frequented. This was another world. His world. In the living area, Andrew directed staff to bring refreshments, along with a guest services manager who wanted to confirm Grace's sleeping arrangements. Michael, still favoring his wrapped ribs, turned to her. "You'll have privacy, of course. A separate bedroom. Anything you need, just let us know." Grace managed a nod. She was torn between gratitude and an awkward sense of displacement. "Thank you." They planned to schedule a more thorough discussion the next morning about what to do regarding the press and any upcoming interviews. For now, the staff seemed to sense their exhaustion. Michael sank into an armchair, wincing at the pressure on his side. Andrew excused himself to handle calls, leaving the two of them with a quiet moment, city lights shimmering beyond the glass. Grace approached the floor-to-ceiling window, letting her gaze roam over the metropolis. The glow of streetlights stretched into the distance. Skyscrapers spiked the horizon. A faint hum of traffic pulsed below, so different from the hush of pine forests and mountain gales. She pressed a hand to the cool glass. "I never expected any of this," she murmured. Michael stood, joining her by the window. His reflection caught hers in the glass, two silhouettes against a field of urban stars. "Neither did I," he admitted. "Not the storm, not meeting you, not bringing you here." He glanced down at the bandages on his ribs. "But sometimes life reorders things for us, forces us to see what matters in ways we wouldn't choose." She turned, meeting his gaze. Her heart thudded a little harder. She thought about the terror of those snowy ledges, the closeness they'd shared under that battered cabin roof. Their bond felt both fragile and strangely resilient. "I just hope I can keep up," she said quietly, gesturing at the opulence around them. "This isn't my world." Michael's eyes softened. "It can be whatever you want it to be. If you choose to stay, we'll figure it out. If you choose to walk away tomorrow, I'll respect that." He shrugged, then winced at the motion. "You're the bravest person I know. You climbed the uncharted slopes of my life without hesitation." Grace couldn't help a small laugh, still marveling at how quickly the ground beneath her had shifted. "I suppose we'll see if I slip," she said, "or if I manage to hold on." They stood side by side for a while longer, letting the quiet city hum fill the space between them. Tomorrow she'd meet his staff, maybe even that imposing grandmother whose name carried such weight. She'd learn how the corridors of power turned just like unpredictable mountain weather, and she'd have to decide if her path would remain entwined with Michael Bennett's, this man of secrets and sincerity, or if she'd return to the ridges that had defined her life. One way or another, the climb was far from over. Sunlight crept over the city skyline, painting the penthouse's glass walls in a subtle glow. Grace blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the plush mattress and the quiet hum of a climate-controlled room. The events of the last few days floated to the surface of her mind, an avalanche of memories that felt surreal in her unfamiliar surroundings. She lay still for a moment, gazing at the refined decor of the guest bedroom Andrew had hastily prepared. It all felt like stepping into someone else's dream. Reluctantly, she sat up, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. From the window, morning traffic looked like toy cars navigating the city's streets. Nothing about this place resembled her mountain home. She wondered if she'd find a note from Michael or Andrew instructing her on what to do next, or if she was simply free to wander. Her stomach rumbled. The last real meal she'd had was a ration bar and stale coffee in that snowy outpost days ago. Despite her reluctance, she decided to investigate the kitchen or at least find some sign of breakfast. She slipped into the hallway, noticing how her footsteps sank into the thick carpet without a sound. An opulent sitting area spread out before her, anchored by a large window with a dazzling city view. She half expected to see staff scurrying about, but the suite was quiet, almost eerily so. Spotting an open doorway on the left, she ventured through it and found a sleek, modern kitchen with polished counters and high-end appliances. A tall man in a crisp black uniform stood by the stove, stirring something aromatic in a small pot. He turned at her approach, offering a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss Grace," he greeted, voice low and composed. "I'm Samuel, one of Mr. Bennett's private chefs. May I get you something?" Grace felt her cheeks warm. She had never imagined having a private chef at her disposal. "Oh, please, just call me Grace," she murmured. "I didn't mean to intrude." He shook his head. "It's no intrusion. I'm here to help. Are you hungry? We have a range of breakfast options." She almost laughed at the question. She had spent the last few nights rationing tiny energy bars in a frozen cabin. "Yes, definitely." With quiet efficiency, Samuel whipped up fluffy scrambled eggs, whole-grain toast, and a plate of fresh fruit. Grace was startled by the speed at which it all appeared before her on a sleek wooden tray. "Thank you," she managed, sitting at the small kitchen table. The first bite of warm eggs melted on her tongue, and her eyes fluttered closed. It was almost embarrassing how blissful such a simple meal could feel. Halfway through her breakfast, she heard soft footsteps in the hall. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, still favoring his injured ribs. He wore casual clothing, dark jeans and a plain sweater, yet he carried himself with that same quiet gravity she'd witnessed in the hospital. Their eyes met, and a small, mutual smile formed. "Morning," he said, pulling out a chair beside her. "I'm glad you're eating. You must have been starving." She nodded between bites, noticing a nurse's small kit under his arm. "Are they still checking on you?" He sighed. "Andrew insisted that a nurse drop by daily until my bruises heal. I'm sure it's overkill, but—" His voice trailed off as Samuel brought over another plate of food, presumably for him. Michael muttered a thanks before directing his attention back to Grace. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Though this place is so quiet, I had trouble believing I was still in the city." She watched him carefully butter a piece of toast, his expression pensive. "It was designed for privacy," Michael explained. "When you run an empire like Bennett Technologies, you learn to value any sanctuary from the noise of the world. My grandmother, though, she thrives on public spectacle." Grace raised an eyebrow. She recalled Andrew's mention of a looming board meeting and the tension in Michael's eyes at the hospital. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "If we're going to meet, I'd like some warning." Michael leaned back, crossing one ankle over his knee. "Margaret Bennett. She's the head of our family and in many ways the driving force behind the company's global success. She's brilliant and ruthless. My parents died when I was still a teenager, so she took me under her wing, shaping me to lead the company someday. She expects me to embody the Bennett name, to continue our legacy." He paused, bitterness creeping into his tone. "So when I go missing on a remote mountain, it's not just a personal scare, it's a crisis for the business." Grace listened, sympathizing with the pressures he must have endured. "So she's upset that you disappeared without telling her?" His mouth tightened. "Upset doesn't quite cover it. She hates unpredictability. I suspect she'll turn our ordeal into a test of loyalty, or an excuse to clamp down on my personal freedoms." He hesitated, setting his coffee cup down. "And then there's you." She swallowed. "Me? She'll want to know who you are, why I brought you here, and whether your presence complicates her carefully laid plans." He gave an apologetic shrug. "I told you, she can be ruthless. She sees people as assets or obstacles. I'm worried about how she'll view you." Grace's appetite dulled at his words. She set her fork aside, the tension in her shoulders rising. I don't want to cause problems. Maybe I should just leave, get a hotel room somewhere. I can handle the reporters myself." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You don't have to handle anything alone, not after what we've been through. Don't let her intimidate you before you even meet." She forced a thin smile. He reached across, resting a hand lightly on hers. The small gesture of warmth reminded her of those intense hours they'd spent in the blizzard, saving each other. "I'm just not used to this world," she murmured. "I know," he said, voice gentle. "But you belong here if you choose to. Because you're part of my story now, like it or not." A slight wry grin twisted his lips. Before she could reply, Andrew poked his head into the kitchen. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Grace. Pardon the interruption, but the security team just received word that your grandmother's jet landed an hour ago. She'll be arriving at Bennett Tower by noon. Also, we have a short meeting with the PR department in about 40 minutes to go over press strategies." Michael exhaled slowly. "All right, we'll be ready." Andrew nodded and vanished, footsteps echoing down the hall. Grace's pulse sped up, so the powerful Margaret Bennett was en route, probably bristling with fury. 40 minutes to figure out press strategies?" she asked, letting out a shaky laugh. "Sure, I'll just read a few pamphlets on how to talk to the media." Michael stood, gingerly pressing a hand to his side. "You don't have to speak to anyone," he said. "We just need you in the room so the team knows how to handle questions about the rescue. They'll want to spin the story a certain way, maybe emphasize the romance of a billionaire rescued by a courageous local guide. That angle is good press. But if you're uncomfortable, we can set boundaries." She bristled a bit at the word spin, but recognized the practicality. "All right, I'll come to the meeting, but no one's going to turn me into some fictional damsel, okay? I guided you up there, and we faced a storm. That's the truth." Michael's expression softened. "I promise, no false narrative. We'll keep it real." They finished breakfast, and Grace quickly retreated to her room to freshen up. She picked out the nicest sweater and jeans she'd brought, feeling self-conscious about her limited wardrobe. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection. A faint bruise marred her forehead from banging it on the cabin's doorframe one night. Her hair was in need of a trim. Her cheeks were still pink from days of windburn, not exactly the polished image to match Bennett Tower's glamour, but she was who she was. A soft knock on her door startled her. "Come in," she called. Andrew stepped inside, offering a garment bag. "For you, Miss Grace. It's just a simple jacket and blouse from our in-house tailor if you'd prefer something more formal for the PR meeting." He cleared his throat, noting her slight frown. "You're under no obligation to wear it, of course." She exhaled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said politely, accepting the bag. After he left, she unzipped it to reveal a sleek navy blazer and a white blouse, both crisp and understated. Though a small part of her rebelled at the notion of dressing up for a press meeting she never asked for, another part of her recognized that blending in might be easier than standing out as the mountain girl in worn plaid. 10 minutes later, she emerged into the living area in the blazer, smoothing her hair self-consciously. Michael, who stood by a panoramic window, turned at her approach. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "You look great," he said. Heat rose to her cheeks. "Thank you," Andrew insisted. Michael cracked a grin. "He's good at that. Insisting. Are you ready?" She nodded, ignoring the persistent flutter in her stomach. Together they entered the penthouse's private elevator. Andrew joined them, briefing Michael in hushed tones about the upcoming session with the PR team. Grace stood quietly, heart thumping. Part of her wanted to ask what her role would be in all this. Another part dreaded the possibility of being thrust into a public spotlight. The elevator descended swiftly, lights flickering across polished panels. They stepped out onto a floor that seemed to serve as a central hub for Bennett Technologies' communications department. Frosted glass walls divided sleek, minimalist offices. Busy staffers typed away at open-plan desks. The hush was professional, but Grace sensed a simmering excitement, whispers traveling about the building that the boss had returned. "In here," Andrew said, opening a conference room door. The space inside was large, with a wall-mounted screen displaying swirling company logos. Around a glossy table sat half a dozen individuals, a stern-faced older man in a tailored suit, 2 younger women with notepads, a communications director, and a couple of legal advisors. They all rose respectfully as Michael entered. "Mr. Bennett," the stern-faced man said, nodding. "Welcome back." Michael acknowledged the group. "Thank you, Strickland. Let's keep this brief and straightforward, all right? Grace is here of her own will, and she'll only do what she's comfortable with." Strickland's gaze shifted to Grace. His eyes flicked over her in a rapid assessment, though he kept his expression neutral. "Of course. Please, have a seat, Miss... Grace?" he asked, fumbling for her last name. "Just Grace," she said, sitting by Michael. The tension in the room was palpable. She could practically feel the unspoken curiosity about who she was and how exactly she factored into Michael's near disaster. The communications director, a poised woman with short hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "We've prepared a preliminary statement to release to major outlets," she said, clicking a remote to display text on the screen. "Essentially, we confirm that Mr. Bennett was on personal leave, encountered a mountaineering accident, and was rescued by a skilled local guide, Miss Grace, before being airlifted to safety. We're highlighting the heroism involved and emphasizing that Bennett Technologies' operations were never at risk." Strickland jumped in, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. "Our main concern is controlling the narrative. We want to convey gratitude to Miss Grace without suggesting any liability on the company's part or drawing undue speculation about why Mr. Bennett was absent during a critical period." Grace glanced at Michael, feeling a flicker of discomfort at hearing them dissect her role like a bullet point. But she forced herself to focus as the director continued. "In addition, we'll need to handle any interview requests. Outlets are already requesting to speak with Miss Grace. Some want first-person accounts of the rescue." Grace's stomach clenched. She pictured a reporter shoving a microphone in her face, twisting her words. "I'm not sure I'm up for interviews," she said quietly. Michael placed a reassuring hand on the conference table beside hers. "She's not a public figure. We can't force her into that." Strickland pursed his lips. "We'd prefer not to refuse every request outright, or it might look secretive. But we can limit it, perhaps a short written statement in Grace's own words, or a controlled interview with a friendly outlet. That way we answer the public's curiosity and move on quickly." Grace swallowed hard, uncertain. The room's fluorescent lights felt hotter. She imagined the swirl of cameras, the possibility of her little hometown becoming a spectacle. Yet the logic of a controlled statement made sense. If she tried to hide, rumor mills might spin wild theories. She nodded, voice subdued. "If that's what it takes to avoid a circus, then all right. One statement or one interview, but I'd want to see the questions first." A ripple of relief passed around the table. Strickland made a note. "Understood. We'll coordinate with you and Mr. Bennett for approval before anything goes live." The conversation shifted to the timing of the press release, the possibility of a discreet photo to accompany it. Grace listened, numb. This was a world of polished narratives and crisis management. She felt like a climber again, perched precariously on a ledge, except this time the ledge was social media and PR spin. Eventually the meeting wrapped up. Everyone rose, offering polite nods. Michael guided Grace out into the corridor. "You okay?" he asked softly, noticing her tension. She expelled a breath. "It's just so calculated. Even the rescue is turned into bullet points and headlines." Michael's face filled with quiet sympathy. "Welcome to my daily reality. This is why I needed to escape, why I tried to climb that mountain." His gaze flicked to a passing staffer who bowed slightly in acknowledgement. "I know it's a lot. If you need space, just say the word." Grace managed a small, grateful smile. "I appreciate it, but I'll see this through for now." They made their way back to the elevator. Andrew caught up with them, phone pressed to his ear. "Your grandmother is on her way up from the lobby," he whispered, eyes darting. "She brought the full board with her, apparently. They want to greet you together as a show of unity." Michael stiffened, his jaw clenching. "Of course she did." He turned to Grace. "I'm sorry. This might be intense." "I can handle it," she said, lifting her chin, though her heart hammered at the idea of facing Margaret Bennett's formidable presence. The elevator rose swiftly. When the doors opened, they found themselves in the executive foyer, a spacious area adorned with modern art and a glossy reception desk. A group of well-dressed individuals stood waiting, men in tailored suits, women in crisp skirts or pantsuits, all radiating authority. And in the center, a tall, silver-haired woman in a black coat, spine straight as an iron rod. Margaret Bennett. Her piercing gaze flicked over Michael with both relief and exasperation, then shifted to Grace. The older woman's sharp eyes narrowed just a fraction, reading everything she could from Grace's posture in mere seconds. In that charged silence, Grace felt she had gone from scaling a perilous mountain to scaling an entirely different peak, the summit of corporate power, where the slightest misstep might send her tumbling down. "Grandmother," Michael said evenly, stepping forward. Margaret lifted her chin. "Michael," she replied, voice crisp, "I'm pleased you survived." Then her steely gaze landed on Grace. "And you must be the guide who rescued my grandson." She said the word rescued with a faint note of skepticism, as if uncertain of the real story. Grace, fighting a surge of nerves, squared her shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Grace." Margaret Bennett offered no handshake, just an imperious nod. "I'd like to speak with you both, privately." She gestured to a pair of wide double doors leading to an executive conference lounge. The crowd of board members parted, allowing the trio to pass. Michael pressed a reassuring hand at Grace's back, but she could sense his unease. Beyond those doors lay the next trial in their unlikely journey, a confrontation with a matriarch whose will alone could reshape everything Grace thought she knew. And the question echoed in Grace's mind. Will the fierce storms of the boardroom prove even more treacherous than the icy ledges they'd conquered together? Margaret Bennett led them into the executive conference lounge, a spacious room with polished wood paneling, minimalist furniture, and a gleaming skyline view through floor-to-ceiling windows. At the center was a long, oval table, flanked by leather chairs that looked more like thrones of corporate authority. Sunlight reflected off the glass surfaces, setting a glare across the polished floors. Grace's footsteps seemed to echo in the hush, making her all too aware of the contrast between her own uncertainty and the unyielding confidence radiating from Margaret. The moment the doors closed, Margaret turned to Michael. "You had us all worried." Her voice was low, each word precise. There was no warmth in her tone, only a frosty sort of relief. "And while I respect your wish for private escapes," she continued, "the timing of your disappearance was inexcusable, Michael. The board has been in an uproar. Shareholders are uneasy." Then her gaze flicked to Grace again, piercing. "And we have her." Michael set his jaw, frustration flickering across his features. "Grandmother, I needed time away. I've told you before that this relentless schedule is suffocating. I didn't plan to vanish in a blizzard." He drew a careful breath. "If not for Grace, I might not be standing here at all." Margaret's expression didn't soften. Instead, she regarded Grace with a subtle tilt of her head. "Yes, your heroic guide," she said, unimpressed. "I've read the preliminary statements from our PR team. They claim she saved you. While I don't question your skills, Miss Grace, I do question the necessity of Michael placing himself in such reckless danger." Her words were pointed. To Grace, they felt like carefully aimed darts. "I never asked him to climb that route," Grace answered, voice steady. She felt Michael's subtle shift beside her, as if encouraging her to stand firm. "He hired me as a guide, and I did my job. When the storm hit, we both had to survive." She swallowed, meeting Margaret's steely gaze. "There was no grand plan to interfere with your business, if that's what you're implying." Margaret's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "I see you're direct, at least." She turned back to Michael. "The board meeting starts in an hour. You'll attend, I presume?" Michael nodded, his injured side making the motion look stiff. "Yes. I'll address everything. But you need to accept that I have a life outside this tower, Grandmother. You can't hold me prisoner here." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, Michael. You know I have no interest in imprisoning you, but I can't allow personal whims to endanger our legacy. That's my primary concern." Grace felt a chill. She'd expected Margaret to be formidable, but seeing her in person was another matter. Every word dripped with authority, honed by decades of boardroom battles. Michael might be the company's heir, but Margaret was its matriarch, unyielding, unmoved by anything except strategic advantage. "And Miss Grace," Margaret added, turning again, "you're staying here, I'm told." "Yes," Michael answered firmly before Grace could speak. "For now, she is my guest, and she's entitled to respect after what she did for me." Margaret paused, as if weighing whether to press the issue. Her lips tightened. "Very well. We'll see how the board reacts to her presence. In any case, I trust you'll manage the press situation efficiently." Her voice took on a clipped edge. "We cannot afford a scandal." Grace bristled internally. If her saving Michael's life was considered a scandal, what did that say about this world? She forced herself to remain calm. The older woman stepped away, glancing at her slim gold watch. "I have a few calls to make before the meeting. Michael, Andrew will fill you in on the agenda. You'll meet the board in the main conference room on the 50th floor." She spared Grace a final, assessing look. "I'll see you both soon." Then, with that, Margaret swept out, the conference room doors closing behind her. A breath Grace didn't know she was holding escaped. "That was intense," she muttered. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "Welcome to my life," he said quietly. "She's used to controlling every aspect of this company, and by extension me." He caught Grace's eye. "I'm sorry if she was harsh." Grace shook her head. "I can handle it. But this is a different kind of storm, that's for sure." He offered her a half-smile of sympathy. "Come on. Let's find Andrew and see what the board wants exactly. If you're uncomfortable, you don't have to stay in the meeting. But I'd like you there, if only so you can understand the dynamics and defend yourself if needed." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." They found Andrew in a smaller adjacent office, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up with relief when they entered. "Michael, Miss Grace, I've just spoken to the board's assistant. Here's the agenda." He handed over a printed sheet bulleting topics like financial projections, press release status, and heir apparent absence discussion. Michael snorted. "They turned my disappearance into an official bullet point?" Andrew nodded wryly. "Yes. They're calling it an unanticipated absence. Margaret Bennett wants a formal explanation." His gaze shifted to Grace, then back to Michael. "The board might press for a show of accountability, like a timeline of your activities, possibly an apology or even a small penalty. It's all to soothe the shareholders." Michael skimmed the agenda, jaw tightening. "I'll handle it. Grace, you can sit in, but you're under no obligation to speak unless they address you directly." Andrew raised a finger. "On that note, Miss Grace, a few board members might want to hear from you. They're curious how you got Michael out of danger. My advice? Keep it simple. Emphasize that you acted as his guide, the situation was unforeseen, and you're cooperating with the company's PR strategy. Avoid personal details if you're not comfortable." Grace inhaled, gathering her courage. "Understood." Soon, they stood outside the 50th floor conference room. Through the glass walls, Grace could see a large oval table similar to the lounges but bigger, enough for over a dozen men and women. They were all impeccably dressed, flipping through files or whispering to one another. Margaret sat at the head, calm and composed. The tension in the air was palpable even from the hallway. Michael took a steadying breath. "Here we go," he murmured to Grace, guiding her inside. All conversation quieted instantly. Eyes snapped toward them, some curious, others indifferent or guarded. Margaret gave a tight nod of acknowledgement, then tapped the table with a manicured nail. "We have quorum," she announced. "Let's proceed." Michael and Grace took seats toward the head of the table. Andrew remained standing near the wall, prepared to assist. The meeting kicked off with a rapid series of formalities. Roll call, approval of minutes, a swift financial update that breezed past Grace's understanding with dizzying numbers about acquisitions and R&D. She tried to keep her composure, though her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Then came the main agenda item, unanticipated absence. Margaret folded her hands on the table. "Michael, you owe this board an explanation. During a crucial phase for Bennett Technologies, finalizing the next product launch, maintaining investor confidence, you vanished without word. That left Andrew and me scrambling to keep rumors at bay. The stock price wavered upon news that you were unaccounted for. Kindly clarify your intentions." The older members eyed Michael closely. Younger ones took notes. Grace could sense their distrust, as though they saw him as a child who hadn't earned his seat at the table. Clearing his throat, Michael addressed them. "I regret the concerns caused by my trip. I went to the mountains for personal reflection, a break from the constant pressure. I recognize the timing was less than ideal, but it was never my intent to jeopardize the company. Unfortunately, a severe storm struck, causing a life-threatening situation." He paused, glancing around. "Had it not been for Miss Grace's expertise, I might not be here to offer any explanation." Several board members flicked their gazes to Grace. She tried not to shrink under the scrutiny. One man in a pinstripe suit whose nameplate read McAllister spoke up. "So you put yourself in mortal danger as a means of stress relief?" Michael's lips tightened. "You could phrase it differently, but yes, I took a risk. Life is more than board meetings, Mr. McAllister. However, I acknowledge the disruption. I'm prepared to answer for it." Margaret leaned forward. "And what form do you imagine that accountability taking?" "The board must reassure shareholders. Some form of public statement about your commitment to Bennett Technologies? A vow that such recklessness won't happen again?" Michael bristled, but caught Grace's eye. She saw his conflict, wanting autonomy but aware he had to concede something. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I'll issue a formal statement taking responsibility for the inconvenience caused. I'll reaffirm my dedication to the company's success." Soft murmurs of approval floated around the table. Then a woman with silver-streaked hair, labeled Winters, folded her arms and addressed Grace directly. "Miss Grace, you are—" Grace swallowed. "I'm a local mountain guide from a small town in the northern ranges," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Michael hired me to lead him safely. The storm was unexpected, and we took shelter for days. We were both nearly out of supplies when rescue arrived. There's no hidden plot here." Winters pursed her lips. "Thank you. But we'd like to know whether you intend to remain involved in Mr. Bennett's affairs. We can't have—" She paused, searching for words. "We can't have an unvetted individual influencing company decisions or presenting a public image that conflicts with Bennett Technologies' brand." A flare of indignation lit inside Grace, but she tempered it. "I have no interest in corporate affairs. I only stayed because your press team suggested it would be simpler to handle media inquiries together. I'm not here to meddle in your brand." McAllister cleared his throat. "Indeed. But you're also living in Mr. Bennett's penthouse, we hear?" Michael cut in firmly. "She's my guest. She has as much right to be there as any friend or colleague of mine. That's not up for debate." Margaret's stare remained icy. "Michael, dear, we must ensure no further scandal. If Miss Grace is to remain in your life, we need clarity about her role. The media will spin all sorts of narratives. Some might say she manipulated you to gain wealth, or that her rescue was contrived." She lifted a hand to forestall protest. "I'm not accusing her, but these are the stories tabloids love. We can't let rumor overshadow the upcoming product launch." Grace felt her cheeks burn at the insinuation. "I'm not after his money," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "I have a business, helping hikers, that's all." A tall board member with a soft accent named Esposito spoke gently. "We understand, Miss Grace, but this is how high-profile worlds operate. The truth rarely matters as much as the story people believe. We want to protect the company and, ironically, you, from harmful rumors." Michael exhaled, frustration evident. "What do you propose? A contract that says she can't speak about certain things? A background check? It's demeaning?" Margaret's lips pressed thin. "Perhaps both, but discreetly. Let's not pretend it's abnormal. Anyone in close contact with the Bennett heir has always been vetted." She leveled a look at Grace. "This is how we protect the brand, child. You'll find no malice in it, merely necessity." Child. The word grated on Grace, but she bit her tongue. She reminded herself that exploding here would do no one any good. "Do what you must," she said quietly, "as long as it's straightforward." Margaret's gaze lingered, faint curiosity in her eyes. "You speak with more composure than I expected." "I've guided climbers on sheer cliffs," Grace said, lifting her chin. "You learn to keep calm, or you fall." A tiny, cold smile ghosted Margaret's lips. "Perhaps you're not entirely out of your depth here." The meeting continued with talk of next steps. Michael's apology statement, how PR would spin the rescue, how to handle Grace's presence in the city. The board wanted a minimal fuss approach, one official interview or statement from Grace, and a formal vow from Michael that he was dedicated to Bennett Technologies. Grace listened to each bullet point, her insides a swirl of conflicting emotions. This was exactly why Michael fled to the mountains. Endless scrutinies, rigid expectations, no breathing room. At last, Margaret called the meeting to a close. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize details for the product launch. Michael, be prepared to demonstrate your leadership. We can't have you vanish again. Michael's eyes flashed, but he nodded curtly. The board members began gathering papers, the tension in the room easing as they filed out. When the doors swung shut behind the last of them, Grace slumped in her chair, exhaling. That was... well, I'd say it's more exhausting than fighting a snowstorm, but maybe on par. Michael raked a hand through his hair, grimacing. I'm sorry you had to endure that. They're fixated on controlling every angle. She offered a faint wry smile. I can handle a few suspicious glares. At least no one's tried to toss me out of the building, yet. He stood, wincing slightly at his bruised side. Not yet, anyway. His voice softened. My grandmother isn't always so harsh, but with the board present, she's playing the role of ruthless leader. He paused, gazing down at her. Thank you for standing your ground. You didn't let them intimidate you. Grace rose from her seat, adjusting her blazer. She felt drained but oddly proud. I'll survive. I've survived worse. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about how all this attention might disrupt my life. Michael caught her hand in a gentle squeeze. We'll make sure you're not swallowed by it. That's a promise. Andrew appeared at the door, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Your grandmother wants a word with you privately, Michael. She's waiting in her office. Grace, you're free to head back upstairs, or I can show you around the building if you'd like a short tour. Grace glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragement. Take the tour, he said quietly. See a bit of the world you've stumbled into. I'll meet you back at the penthouse. She agreed, though her curiosity was laced with caution. Sure, lead the way, Andrew. As they stepped into the hallway, leaving Michael behind, she felt a swirl of emotions. She'd just met the legendary Margaret Bennett, faced down a corporate board and emerged upright. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that the real challenges were only beginning. She'd climbed the literal mountains with Michael. Now came the metaphorical ones, navigating a labyrinth of wealth, power, and hidden motives. And somewhere in that labyrinth lurked Margaret's true intentions. Beneath the veneer of familial concern lay an iron will that might see Grace as an obstacle to be removed, or an asset to be molded. Either way, the storm wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. Andrew led Grace down a maze of polished corridors, each lined with abstract art and glass panels that offered glimpses into Bennett Technologies' bustling departments. Teams of employees worked behind ergonomic desks, surrounded by the gentle hum of high-end computers. Occasionally, someone would glance up, curiosity flickering across their features when they spotted Andrew and the unfamiliar woman at his side. Grace did her best to walk calmly, though her heart thumped with each inquisitive stare. You'll find that every floor here has its own unique function, Andrew explained as he guided her along. We're quite large, of course. Research and development takes up nearly a dozen floors, marketing another 4, legal has 2, plus the executive levels. He paused before a window that overlooked a grand atrium. Sunlight poured in from a massive skylight, casting geometric patterns of light onto a lush, plant-filled space below. This is the central hub, he said, pointing. Employees can gather there for coffee, informal meetings, or simply to decompress. Grace surveyed the atrium, marveling at the tall indoor trees and minimalist sculptures. It felt more like a high-end hotel lobby than a tech company. It's beautiful, she said softly, like a city within a city. Andrew nodded. That's very much how Mr. Bennett's grandmother envisioned it. She believes in an ecosystem for productivity, a contained world where all needs are met. His tone was respectful but carried an undercurrent of detached efficiency. It reminded Grace of how the board members spoke about everything. Measured, strategic, never too emotional. They continued through a hallway with frosted glass walls. Andrew gestured into a large open office. Rows of employees clicked away at advanced design software. Huge monitors displayed prototypes of sleek devices, each window showing CAD outlines and digital animations. "This is one of our product design floors," he said. "Top secret mostly, but you're technically here under Mr. Bennett's approval, so it's okay for you to look." Grace admired the sense of focus each worker displayed. The hush here was different from the corporate tension above. This was the hush of creation, of problem-solving. It felt more organic somehow. "Do they know who I am?" she asked. "Word travels fast," Andrew said, not unkindly. "But as long as you carry yourself with confidence, no one will question your presence." She rubbed her arms, recalling the boardroom's earlier scrutiny. Easier said than done, I suppose. They pressed on, passing a small cafe area where a handful of employees sipped espresso. Andrew paused near a large digital display that cycled through Bennett Technologies' achievements, philanthropic grants, environmental initiatives, scholarships. A photo of Margaret Bennett accepting an industry award filled the screen, then was replaced by a younger Michael smiling during an unveiling event, cutting a ribbon on a new research lab. Grace paused, her gaze lingering on his face. He looked so carefree in that shot, a stark contrast to the tension she'd seen in him recently. "I suppose you're thinking how different he looks now," Andrew remarked, reading her expression. She nodded. He was smiling like he was genuinely proud of something. Then she caught herself, worried she'd said too much. "I mean, he still can smile, of course, but there's an edge to him, like he's carrying a burden." Andrew exhaled a hint of a sigh. "Michael, or Mr. Bennett, has been groomed to lead since he was young, especially after his parents passed. Margaret pushed him to master every aspect of the company, from R&D to finance to public relations. He's never truly had space to breathe." Grace folded her arms. "That must be why he ran off to the mountains, to get away." "Yes, precisely." Andrew's eyes were sympathetic. "Though you see where that choice landed him. Now there's even more pressure to prove he's committed." Something in Grace's chest stirred at the thought. He just needed a break. People shouldn't have to apologize for taking time to clear their heads, especially after so much loss. Andrew's posture tightened. "Miss Grace, I'm not unsympathetic, but Bennett Technologies is massive. Thousands of employees rely on stable leadership. Investors need confidence. When the figurehead disappears, it creates panic. And Margaret Bennett has weathered decades of building this empire. She won't let Michael's personal yearnings erode that." She couldn't deny the logic, even if it felt harsh. "So it's duty above all else." He shrugged, gesturing for them to continue walking. "Margaret believes that without the family's ironclad leadership, the entire enterprise could crumble or be swallowed up by rivals. She insists that her grandson assume his responsibilities fully. Any personal life can only exist in the shadows of those responsibilities." They turned a corner into a quieter corridor. The carpet was thicker here, the walls adorned with subdued lighting. Andrew stopped before a set of wide double doors. "The historical gallery," he said, tapping a keycard on the scanner. The doors slid open, revealing a space that felt more like a museum. Displays of old prototypes, photographs, and memorabilia tracing Bennett Technologies' evolution from a small workshop to a global powerhouse. Grace stepped inside, drawn to a glass case displaying the company's earliest inventions, a series of clunky circuit boards and rudimentary devices that must have been cutting-edge decades ago. Black and white photos showed a younger Margaret and her late husband beaming over prototypes in a modest garage. Another showcased Michael's parents, bright-eyed engineers themselves, unveiling a breakthrough smartphone design that changed the market. She recognized Michael's mother by the sharpness of his cheekbones and the kindness in her eyes. The father had Michael's stance, confident but warm. "They both worked here?" she asked quietly, looking at Andrew. He nodded. "Yes, they were brilliant. instrumental in shaping Bennett Tech's success. Their passing in that car accident was a huge blow, not just to Michael but to the entire organization. He sighed. Margaret took over fully then, ensuring that her grandson's destiny was still intact. Grace walked slowly, absorbing the story told by these exhibits. The sense of legacy was undeniable. Everything around her spoke of ambition, innovation, and loss. If Michael grew up in this shadow, never free to choose his own path, no wonder he yearned for an escape. Stopping at a final display, she found a family portrait. Margaret standing beside a teenage Michael, both dressed formally at some charity gala. The boy's eyes held sadness behind a polite smile. Grace almost felt as if she were peering into his soul, wishing she could reach back in time and comfort him. Andrew cleared his throat. "We should head back up. Michael might be done with Margaret by now. She doesn't like to keep staff waiting." Grace turned. "Right. Thank you for showing me all this." She paused, adding softly, "It explains a lot about him." Andrew's expression was unreadable. "He trusts you. Maybe he sees in you a freedom he's never had." By the time they returned to the executive floor, the board members had mostly dispersed. The corridors were quieter. Andrew checked his phone, received a message, then nodded at Grace. "Michael's meeting Margaret in her personal office suite. I'll take you there." Grace felt her pulse quicken. While she'd faced Margaret in the board meeting, that was a public arena. A private conversation in the matriarch's own domain might be more intense. She wasn't sure if she was invited or if she'd just be waiting. Yet Andrew strode ahead, so she followed. They reached a set of ornate double doors guarded by a discreet security officer. He recognized Andrew and allowed them through. Beyond lay a tastefully decorated reception area where a middle-aged assistant sat at a curved desk. She glanced up with polite curiosity as they entered. Before Grace could ask any questions, a muffled voice rose from the next room. She recognized Michael's tone, low but tense. Margaret's sharper voice interjected. Though Grace couldn't make out the exact words, the conversation clearly bristled with emotion. She shot Andrew a questioning look, but he merely pressed his lips together, indicating they should wait. Then the door swung open. Michael stepped out, jaw clenched, frustration etched on his face. Margaret followed, her expression composed yet taut, as though she'd just delivered a firm ultimatum. She noticed Grace and Andrew and briefly closed her eyes, collecting herself. "Ah, Miss Grace," Margaret began, her tone steady. "Michael and I were discussing the future. Both of you are somewhat at the center of unwanted media attention. I have a proposal." Grace blinked, uncertain whether to speak. Margaret raised her chin. "I can offer you a position within Bennett Technologies, a consultancy related to safety and outdoor leadership, perhaps. Something that justifies your continued presence without raising eyebrows. You'll have a salary, benefits, and the company's support. In return, you adhere to certain confidentiality agreements. This is standard protocol for close associates of the Bennett family." Michael shot Grace a worried glance. "She just wants to keep you under surveillance," he muttered. Margaret's gaze sharpened. "It's not about surveillance, Michael. It's about offering Miss Grace stability and legitimacy in a world that can be harsh. Already tabloids are sniffing around, asking who she is, what she wants from you. If she's part of the company, the narrative becomes straightforward. She's an employee who played a heroic role. There's no question of ulterior motives or scandal." Grace's mind whirled. Was Margaret basically offering her a way to remain near Michael while also controlling the story? I'm not sure I want to be an employee," she said, voice careful. "I have my own business back home." Margaret's lips pursed. "A small guiding service, yes? I imagine your local clients might vanish once reporters overwhelm your town with speculation. A Bennett Technologies consultancy doesn't have to be permanent. Merely a stopgap until the storm settles." Andrew piped in softly. This arrangement could also give you resources to expand your guiding business eventually, if that's what you wish, and you'd be protected from unscrupulous media. Michael folded his arms, expression grim. Grandmother, forcing her into a corporate job is extreme. She's saved me. Doesn't that earn her the right to choose freely? Margaret gave him a measured stare. This is her choice. I'm only suggesting a beneficial solution. She has no idea how brutal the spotlight can be when the press scents a scandal. I do. Silence filled the reception area. Grace felt the weight of 3 sets of eyes on her. Margaret's cool insistence, Michael's protective worry, Andrew's quiet neutrality. She pictured her mountains, the tranquil hush of a pine forest after snowfall. She could go back, try to pick up her old life, but the media intrusion might ruin her peaceful existence. She could hide in a hotel, sure, but that didn't solve anything long-term. This position, however contrived, might provide a shield, and if it let her stay connected with Michael, even for a short while, maybe she could help him find a balance between obligation and freedom. Still, she disliked the idea of being a pawn in Margaret's game. Raising her chin, she addressed Margaret. If I agree, I want clarity on the terms. How long would this last? What exactly are my responsibilities? And will I still be free to return to my own life when this is over? Margaret inclined her head. Of course. We'll draw up a standard contract. A consultancy on safety protocols for employees who travel or engage in off-site activities. You'd provide advice, perhaps lead occasional team-building retreats, 6-month term to start, renewable if both parties wish, a generous salary, benefits, accommodation provided. After that, if you choose to part ways, no obstacles. We'll do a press announcement framing it as a natural progression of your professional relationship with Michael. It sounded too neat, too orchestrated, but maybe that was how things worked here, turning life events into curated narratives. Grace took a slow breath, searching Michael's face. He looked torn, as if part of him wanted her to accept so she'd stay safely in his world, while another part hated that it was his grandmother's scheme. She finally spoke. I'll consider it, but I won't sign anything until I see the exact contract, and I want the freedom to exit if it becomes too oppressive. Margaret's mouth curved in a small, cool smile. That's acceptable. Andrew will handle the paperwork. Michael's shoulders relaxed slightly, relief mixed with resignation in his eyes. We'll talk it through, he assured Grace, stepping closer. No rush. Margaret, apparently satisfied, gestured to her assistant. That will be all for now. I have other appointments. Recognizing dismissal, Grace and Michael followed Andrew back into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving them alone in the corridor. Michael rubbed his temples. I hate that she's pushing you into a corporate role. You don't deserve that pressure. Grace mustered a faint smile. It might be the least complicated option. Funny how that sounds, but it's true. I can't fight off the tabloids alone, and you have enough on your plate without worrying about me being hounded in my hometown. Andrew cleared his throat gently, drawing their attention. I'll draft the paperwork. You'll be free to review and amend. But, Miss Grace, truly, this might protect you from the worst of it. And Margaret's not wrong that you'd gain some resources to safeguard your future. She sighed, mind still spinning. I understand. Michael touched her arm, voice quiet. Let's go upstairs. We can talk properly without all these eyes around. She nodded, a swirl of feelings erupting inside her. Part gratitude that Michael cared, part anxiety at being absorbed into the Bennett machine. In mere days, she'd gone from a solitary guide on a mountainside to a potential corporate consultant entangled in billionaire politics. What a storm indeed, she thought. Back in the penthouse, the afternoon light painted the wide windows in golden warmth. Michael sank onto a couch, carefully propping a pillow against his injured ribs. Grace joined him, kicking off her shoes to curl her legs beneath her. Andrew lingered by the entryway, phone in hand, obviously juggling messages from the board and Margaret. "She never gives an inch," Michael muttered. "I'm sorry you got pulled into this. If you want to walk away, I'll try to shield you as best I can." Grace thought of Margaret's warning about the media, about how her simple life could be ravaged by rumors. Then she glanced at Michael's bandaged ribs, remembering how she'd promised him during the snowstorm that they'd see things through together. "I won't lie, I hate feeling like a pawn, but for now it's probably safer to accept her terms." Michael studied her, an unspoken gratitude in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're comfortable, truly. This job can be mostly symbolic, if you wish, though I'm sure you'd have actual input on safety policies for our travel teams. It's not all smoke and mirrors." She managed a half smile. "I'm not opposed to sharing genuine advice on outdoor safety, and if it helps me gather resources for my business back home, well, maybe that's a silver lining." He nodded, looking relieved. Then he glanced at Andrew, who had just ended a call. "Any updates?" Andrew approached, tucking his phone away. Margaret already told legal to begin drafting a preliminary contract for Grace. "Should be ready tomorrow morning. The board meeting is over and the press release acknowledging your return will go live tonight. Very controlled wording. No specifics about Miss Grace beyond calling her an experienced guide." Grace let out a breath. "That's a start." Andrew gave a thin smile. "Also, a couple of friendly reporters have requested an exclusive interview, one from a reputable magazine, another from a popular daytime talk show. The PR team believes it might be wise for Grace to give a brief statement there to humanize the story and prevent tabloid speculation." She groaned softly, massaging her temples. "Talking in front of cameras, spinning a narrative, this feels so unreal." Michael reached over, squeezing her hand. "We can limit it to a written Q&A if you prefer. We'll see how you feel." Grace nodded, appreciating his support. As Andrew discreetly left to attend to other tasks, she and Michael lingered in companionable silence. The city stretched out below, sparkling in the late afternoon glow, a reminder of the vast machine that Bennett Tech commanded. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice introspective. "You saved my life, Grace, but you're paying such a price for it. I wish I'd never dragged you into this corporate vortex." She shifted closer, leaning an elbow on the couch back to face him. "If I could go back, I'd still rescue you." She bit her lip, surprised at the surge of emotion those words carried. Then she added softly, "Because I know you needed it, not just physically, but maybe in a deeper sense, too." His eyes glistened with something unspoken. "I did need it, even before the fall. You gave me a glimpse of freedom I haven't felt in years. Thank you." A gentle hush fell between them, each moment stretching with possibilities. In the background, the city's hum persisted, but in that private bubble, they shared a subtle bond. Two souls who had weathered the literal storm, now braving the metaphorical one. Grace cleared her throat. "We'll get through this next phase too, somehow. Contracts, board approvals, interviews. It can't be worse than that blizzard." Michael offered a half laugh, half sigh. "No avalanche yet, but there's always the risk in these corridors." Then he grimaced, shifting his bandaged side. "Speaking of which, I need to take it easy. The doctor wants me to rest more than I have been." She rose. "Right. I'll let you lie down. Maybe I'll make some tea if that's okay." He nodded, relief in his smile. "That sounds great." As she headed to the kitchen, Grace glanced back at him. Despite the looming challenges, the contrived job, Margaret's watchful eye, the press inquiries, she felt a quiet determination blooming. She'd guide them both through these treacherous slopes of power. And if, at the end, they could stand together on stable ground, then maybe the storm would have been worth it. Little did she know, the true tests were yet to come. Old rivals of Bennett Tech lurking in the shadows, hidden agendas swirling among the board members, and Margaret's unwavering will to shape her grandson's destiny at any cost. Grace might have entered their world to protect Michael from the outside threats of gossip and scandal. But the greatest dangers might be the ones brewing inside, poised to fracture the Bennett empire from within, and threaten the fragile connection she and Michael were fighting to preserve. For most of Grace's life, evenings had been a time of quiet reflection, watching twilight settle over the mountains, the sky morphing from pink to velvety indigo above evergreen silhouettes. Here in Bennett Tower, dusk felt different. The penthouse windows revealed a sprawling tapestry of city lights shimmering against the night. Even the air had a charge to it, a pulse of urban energy that didn't quite let her relax. She stood at the kitchen counter, waiting for water to boil in a sleek electric kettle that probably cost more than her entire living room furniture back home. It was still strange to realize that this penthouse, so lavish and impersonal, was essentially where Michael lived. Even if he owned multiple residences, the tower was his anchor. She wondered if it ever felt like home to him. He was resting on the couch, half reclined against pillows, one arm draped protectively over his bandaged ribs. He glanced over occasionally, meeting her eyes with a small smile that spoke volumes. The day had been a whirlwind. The tense board meeting, Margaret's job offer, the unspoken concerns about media scrutiny. Yet, in the subdued hush of evening, a fragile sense of calm hung in the air. Grace poured 2 mugs of tea and carried them over. "Chamomile," she said, handing one to Michael. "Figured it might help you unwind." He accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. The steam curled upward, and for a moment he inhaled the gentle aroma. "Sometimes I forget simple comforts like this exist in my world." She settled on the opposite end of the couch, tucking her legs underneath her. "From what I've seen, your world is anything but simple." A dry laugh escaped her lips, and she sipped her tea, letting the warmth seep in. Michael set his mug aside, shifting carefully. "I had a conversation with Andrew earlier," he began. "He said the legal team will have a preliminary contract for you by tomorrow. If you decide to sign it, you could officially join Bennett Tech as a consultant." She exhaled, bracing herself. "Right. So soon." Her stomach fluttered anxiously at the thought. He nodded. "I want you to know there's no rush. You can request changes, or walk away if it feels wrong. My grandmother's pushing for it, but I won't let her strong-arm you." Grace appreciated his concern. "I'll read it carefully before committing." She paused, swirling her tea. "I'm not used to having lawyers draft contracts around me. My biggest legal worry back home is whether a hiker signs the proper waiver." A flicker of amusement brightened Michael's eyes. "We definitely do things on a larger scale here, but let me help you through it." She reached across the cushion, letting her hand rest on his uninjured arm for a brief moment. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm not alone in all this, am I?" His fingers curled over hers, a quiet gesture of solidarity. "Never." They stayed like that for a few beats, the city lights shimmering outside. In that wordless moment, the memory of the storm-bound cabin came flooding back, how they'd shared small comforts in the face of mortal danger. Now, the dangers were intangible. Corporate politics, potential betrayal, relentless media. But the bond they'd forged still glowed beneath it all. A soft knock at the penthouse door interrupted the hush. Grace withdrew her hand. Michael sat up straighter, wincing. "Probably Andrew," he guessed. "He said he might drop off some documents tonight." Sure enough, Andrew stepped in, a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He inclined his head in greeting, though he moved with that brisk efficiency Grace had come to recognize. "Sorry to disturb your evening," he said. "The legal department finished a draft sooner than expected. Thought you might want to review it before tomorrow." He placed the envelope on the glass coffee table. "It's straightforward. A 6-month consultancy for Bennett Technologies, focusing on staff training and outdoor safety, plus advising on risk management for certain field activities, salary, benefits, a non-disclosure clause, the usual corporate disclaimers. Grace felt a twinge of nerves as she eyed the envelope. Her name was typed neatly on the tab. "Okay, I'll have a look." Andrew nodded. "Also, we received a direct inquiry from a well-known talk show. They're offering an exclusive interview if you and Michael, Mr. Bennett, agree." He glanced at Michael. "PR thinks it could help settle speculation early, but it's your call." Michael's expression soured. "The last thing I want is to parade Grace around like some novelty." Andrew's voice stayed calm. "I understand. The team's logic is that a controlled interview can be better than letting tabloids shape the story. But if you're not comfortable, we can decline." Grace sighed, placing her half-finished tea on the table. "I don't love the idea of being interviewed, but I hate the idea of being ambushed by paparazzi even more." Andrew offered a small shrug. "Exactly. Sometimes giving a polished, honest account wards off worse intrusions." Michael exchanged a glance with Grace, searching her face. "If we do it on our terms. We set boundaries. No prying into your private life beyond the rescue details. Agreed?" She managed a tentative nod. "Agreed. But let's not rush. Let me get a sense of this consultancy deal first." Andrew seemed satisfied. "I'll arrange for a potential scheduling block next week if you decide yes. In the meantime, you have the contract. If you have questions, I'm at your disposal." With that, he excused himself politely, leaving them alone once more. Grace picked up the envelope, running her thumb over the edge. She'd never felt so overwhelmed by a piece of paperwork in her life. Yet at the same time, she recognized an odd sense of possibility. Perhaps this arrangement could become more than just a show. Maybe she could truly help Bennett Tech employees stay safe in their travels, or even plan something like corporate retreats in nature that would let her share the beauty of her mountains. The thought sparked a sliver of excitement. Michael watched her carefully. "You okay?" he asked gently. She half smiled. "Scared, but curious." He smiled back, a hint of relief in his features. "That's fair." Outside, the city glowed brighter as full darkness took hold. Grace realized it was getting late. "I'll just read through a few pages before bed," she murmured, rising from the couch. "Then maybe I'll sleep on it. I want a clear head tomorrow." Michael nodded, shifting to make himself comfortable again. "I'll do the same. Let me know if you want a second set of eyes." With the envelope tucked under her arm, Grace slipped to her guest room. The space felt both luxurious and impersonal, the bed a soft oasis under recessed lighting. She changed into pajamas and settled against a stack of pillows, flipping on a lamp that cast a gentle, warm glow. Steeling herself, she opened the manila envelope. It was an impressive stack of pages, typed in neat legal language. Words like consultant, liability, proprietary, and confidential cropped up repeatedly. A bulleted job description detailed how she'd advise on mountaineering best practices, backcountry safety protocols, wilderness emergency response training. Another section explained the compensation, numbers that made her blink in disbelief. It was more than she'd earned in multiple years, guiding on her own. She skimmed further, noticing the non-disclosure agreement, an entire section forbidding her from divulging sensitive company information. She'd also be required to coordinate any interviews or public statements with Bennett Tech's PR department. So they really want me locked down. She understood the logic, but the control it implied made her uneasy. On the other hand, a part of her recognized how this could open doors. She could update her gear shop back home, maybe expand the guiding business in the off-season, hire more guides so she wasn't constantly scraping by, and she'd remain near Michael during these tumultuous months, something her heart quietly wanted, whether she admitted it or not. At the last page, there was a place for her signature. The sight of it made her heart pound, as if stepping onto the edge of a precipice. She'd faced mountain ledges before, but this was a different kind of drop, a leap into corporate life, tethered to the Bennett empire. Could she keep her footing? With a tired sigh, She closed the folder. She'd read enough for one night. Sleep tugged at her, but her mind churned. Before succumbing, she decided a quick chat with Michael might soothe her nerves. Gathering her robe around her, she padded back into the living room. He was still there, lights dimmed, one of the penthouse's large windows framing the city skyline behind him. A single lamp illuminated the contract in his hands, too. He looked up, surprised to see her. "You're done reading already?" She shrugged, stepping closer. "I got the gist." He set his copy aside. "What do you think?" Grace sank onto a nearby chair. "The money alone is wild, but it comes with strings, obviously." She ran a hand through her hair. "I'm not sure how to feel about signing away my right to speak freely about any aspect of the company." Michael grimaced sympathetically. "I get it. That's the corporate machine. My grandmother's big on loyalty and secrecy." She studied him, voice quiet. "Would it make your life easier if I do this?" He hesitated, honesty etched in his features. Yes and no. Yes, because it'd calm the board, unify the story, and keep you safe from harassment. But no, because I worry it forces you deeper into this world. And I know how stifling it can be. Her heart clenched. "I'm still free to walk away, right?" He nodded firmly. "You are. And if you do, I'll do my best to protect you from media frenzy. I just can't promise it'll be easy." She rose, crossing to the window. The city lights below looked both mesmerizing and daunting, like a galaxy of possibilities. "I need to do something," she murmured. "I can't just go home and wait for the storm to blow over. The tabloids might tear my reputation apart. At least with this contract, I have a measure of control." Michael approached, stopping beside her at the glass. Their reflections glowed faintly. "I'd never want you to lose who you are. That's what's so special about you, Grace. Your authenticity, your courage, your independence." She turned to face him. The soft lamplight revealed the worry lines on his brow, the shadows under his eyes. Her voice came out hushed. "You're worth the risk." His chest rose in a subtle intake of breath. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to dissolve. The tension, the politics, the corporate world, they all faded, leaving just two people who'd battled a storm together and found an unexpected bond. If she closed her eyes, she could almost feel the cabin's firelight on her skin, hear the wind raging outside, his breath warm in the silence. But the moment passed, replaced by a delicate awkwardness. Michael gently touched her shoulder, then pulled away. "Let's get some rest," he said, voice tinged with emotion. "Tomorrow we'll tackle the next steps." Grace nodded, breath catching. "Right. Good night." She returned to her room, thoughts swirling. Sleep arrived in fits and starts, haunted by half-formed dreams of jagged cliffs turning into corporate towers, where each misstep led to an endless fall. She dreamed of Margaret's steely gaze, of Andrew handing her reams of legal documents that morphed into swirling snow. When morning arrived, she opened her eyes to a pale dawn sky outside the penthouse window, her mind still tangled, but her resolve firming. In the hours that followed, the building stirred to life. Grace woke to find a breakfast tray waiting, more of Samuel the chef's miraculous cooking, complete with fresh fruit, eggs, and coffee. A note from Michael apologized for his early board appointments. He'd be back around midday. She appreciated the calm start, using the solitude to reread the contract's finer points. Around mid-morning, Andrew arrived with a small folder of addendums. "I had the legal team incorporate some optional clauses," he explained, seating himself in the penthouse living room. "One ensures you can terminate the agreement with minimal notice if circumstances become untenable. Another clarifies the scope of your non-disclosure, so you're not forbidden from discussing your personal experiences on the mountain, for instance, only proprietary company matters." Grace thumbed through the pages. "Thank you. This is a relief. It feels less restrictive." Andrew offered a mild smile. We aim for compromise. Margaret may be tough, but she also understands that forcing your hand entirely would be counterproductive. She's not looking for a hostage. She's looking for a secure narrative. She nodded, though the phrase secure narrative still rankled. Nevertheless, it was a step closer to a situation she could accept. Andrew handed her a pen. If you're satisfied, you can sign. Then we'll finalize everything. You'll officially be a Bennett Technologies consultant. Grace took a measured breath, scanning the final paragraphs. Then, heartbeat thudding, she scribbled her name on the signature line. Somehow, that single act felt momentous, like cresting a ridge and seeing a new vista unfold. She passed the documents back, anxiety and anticipation mingling. Congratulations, Andrew said, his tone polite yet warm. You're now part of Bennett Tech's extended family, in a manner of speaking. She managed a small laugh. Guess so. I hope the family doesn't eat me alive. His expression flickered with a touch of humor. Surviving Margaret is an accomplishment in itself. Shall I show you your new workspace? It's mostly symbolic. A desk on one of the corporate floors where you can coordinate with our travel teams. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Might as well see it. Could be interesting. A short elevator ride later, they emerged onto the 42nd floor, an area dedicated to administrative support and specialized consultants. Andrew led her through a hallway, then stopped at a private cubicle near a window. It was tidy, with a sleek desk and an ergonomic chair. A nameplate read, Grace, Risk and Outdoor Specialist. She stared, amusement battling nerves. A couple of employees paused mid-task to glance at her, then offered polite smiles. She tried to appear confident, reminding herself that she had every right to be here. Andrew introduced her to a few staff members, a travel coordinator, a security liaison. Each greeted her with a mix of curiosity and respect. One of them, a young woman named Bethany, whispered, We're all excited to learn from you. I hear you're a real hero, saving Mr. Bennett like that. She blushed. I've never even been on a hike, so maybe you can give me some pointers. Grace's cheeks warmed. I'd be happy to, and I'm no hero, just a guide who did her job. Bethany grinned. Still impressive. Welcome aboard. As Andrew led her back toward the elevator, Grace couldn't help a small smile. Maybe not everyone here was as daunting as the board. She felt a flicker of hope that she could carve out a genuine role, perhaps even share some of her passion for nature with these city dwellers. Still, the day's triumph didn't diminish the daunting tasks ahead. The looming interview, the potential pitfalls of corporate life, and the intensifying dynamic with Michael. With each passing hour, she stepped deeper into Bennett Tech's fortress-like existence. And beyond these walls, a world of reporters, gossips, and hidden rivals circled, waiting for any slip. Back upstairs, a fresh text from Michael pinged her phone. Just finished board updates. Grandma wants to see us both in her office at noon, something about finalizing details of your role. Are you okay with that? She took a breath, typed back, Yes, I'm ready. Deep down, though, she wondered if anyone could truly be ready to stand in that matriarch's line of fire. Still, she'd weathered literal storms before. Whatever came next, a cunning competitor, a prickly press event, or Margaret's unyielding manipulations, Grace would face it. Because she wasn't just a fish out of water, she was a climber at heart, prepared to find her footing on the steepest terrain. And as she set her phone aside, she felt a quiet steadiness rise inside her. She'd chosen this path, for better or worse. If there was any chance she could help Michael find the freedom he craved and forge a place of her own in this demanding new world, she was determined to chase it. The storm was far from over, but she would brace herself, harness tight, boots planted, ready to climb the next peak. The antique clock in Margaret Bennett's office chimed noon with a crisp, resonant note that seemed to echo through the hush of the corridor. Grace stood beside Michael as Andrew knocked softly on the polished mahogany door. A muffled voice, Margaret's invited them in. Michael offered Grace a fleeting, reassuring look. She inhaled, steadying herself, and they stepped into the sanctum of Bennett Tech's matriarch. Margaret's private office was a study in restrained opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline, but the interior was decidedly old-world, with dark wood paneling, plush carpets, and carefully curated antique furniture. On a broad wooden desk rested a sleek tablet computer, alongside an ornate brass lamp that looked like an heirloom. A large painting of a stormy sea dominated one wall, its dark waves rolling in shades of gray and blue. Margaret herself sat behind the desk, posture ramrod straight. Her ice-gray hair was coiled in an impeccable chignon, and a single string of pearls glinted against her black suit. She regarded them in silence for a beat before inclining her head in greeting. "Michael, Miss Grace," she said, hands folded atop a small stack of papers. "Do come closer." Grace swallowed, taking in the older woman's composed demeanor. Even though she'd faced Margaret already, the weight of this setting felt more personal and somehow more intimidating. Michael placed a hand lightly on Grace's back, guiding her to a pair of chairs facing Margaret's desk. He took the seat beside her. "Grandmother," he said, tone guarded but respectful. "You wanted to finalize details?" "Yes," Margaret replied. Her gaze flicked to Grace. "I see you've signed the consultancy contract. Andrew informed me. I appreciate your willingness to cooperate, Miss Grace." Grace dipped her head politely. "I hope I can be of real use, not just a figurehead." Margaret's expression revealed little. "That remains to be seen, but we shall set you up for success. We're arranging a welcome announcement internally. Nothing flashy, just so staff know who you are and why you're here. And as for the public side," she extracted a thin folder from the stack. "Our PR department has fielded multiple interview requests. We've narrowed it down to 2 we consider the safest outlets for an exclusive. One reputable news magazine that leans sympathetic to personal human interest stories, or a popular morning talk show with a vast audience. Either will accept a brief appearance from both of you." Michael frowned. "I don't like the idea of parading Grace on television. The magazine piece might be less invasive." Margaret's gaze was cool. "The morning show is larger. It could settle the story in one broad stroke. But I'll leave the final decision to Miss Grace." Suddenly, all eyes were on Grace. She fought a flicker of panic. "I'm not thrilled about cameras," she admitted honestly. "But I also see that a live interview might shut down rumors faster. If people see me speak, maybe they'll believe the simple truth, that I'm a guide who helped Michael, and that's all." Margaret inclined her head. "Precisely my thought." Michael's jaw tensed. "But it's more stressful for her." Grace placed a hand on his arm, a gentle reassurance. "I'll be okay," she said softly. Then she looked at Margaret. "Let's consider the morning talk show if it truly helps quell speculation. But I want some assurances. No invasive personal questions, no cornering me about finances or family." Margaret's lips curved in a faint, approving smile. "We'll have our PR team negotiate terms. You'll receive a list of pre-approved topics, and we'll ensure the hosts understand the boundaries. If they step out of line, you have every right to say you won't answer." Relief mingled with trepidation in Grace's chest. "All right." She cast Michael a sidelong glance, seeing the concern etched in his eyes. But she nodded, resolving to face this head-on. Margaret moved briskly on. "Now, regarding your consultancy, you'll meet with our HR tomorrow for orientation, sign a few more documents about corporate confidentiality. Andrew will schedule a training plan for you. Our security division can show you how we currently approach travel risk. You can then propose improvements." Grace perked up slightly. "I'd appreciate seeing what you do already. Then I can figure out what to add." "Excellent," Margaret said with a curt nod. Her gaze drifted to Michael. "And you, grandson, will demonstrate your seriousness by attending all scheduled product briefings this week. We have a new software update rolling out. I expect your input. No more absences." Michael's jaw tightened again, but he answered, "Understood, grandmother. I'll be there." For a moment, Margaret studied him. Something like reluctant affection flickered in her eyes, masked by her rigid demeanor. Then she turned her attention back to Grace. "I trust you'll keep an eye on him," she said, voice oddly gentler. "He needs someone to remind him he's human occasionally." Grace blinked, uncertain how to respond to the sudden, almost personal note in Margaret's tone. Before she could say anything, the older woman rose, a clear sign that the meeting was over. "That's all. Thank you for your cooperation." Michael and Grace stood, taking the hint. As they moved toward the door, Margaret called quietly, "Miss Grace." Grace paused, looking back. Margaret's expression was unreadable. "I admire courage," she said simply, "but bravery can be undone by naivety. Be certain you know which is which." The words sent a small chill through Grace. She offered a subdued nod and followed Michael into the hall. Once the door shut behind them, she let out a breath. "That was cryptic," she muttered, Michael's lips pressed thin. "That's my grandmother's specialty. She's warning you not to get in over your head." He rubbed his bandaged ribs, grimacing. "I'm sorry if it sounded like a threat." Grace shrugged, though her heart thudded. "It's all right. I know what I signed up for. Or at least I'm learning." They made their way back to the elevator. Andrew joined them en route, phone in hand as always. "We'll schedule your morning show appearance for next week if that's acceptable," he said, "and finalize a date for the magazine piece. That might run a longer, more in-depth interview so we can space it out." Grace nodded, mind spinning at the thought of being on live TV. "I'll need to practice not sounding like an idiot," she joked nervously. "I'm used to guiding tourists, not talking to an audience of millions." Andrew offered a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We'll set up some media coaching sessions. Don't worry, it's routine. We'll go through likely questions, how to handle curveballs." Michael's arm brushed hers in the crowded elevator. "I'll be there with you," he said softly. "We'll make it as painless as possible." She appreciated his calm support more than she could say. The elevator whooshed down toward the main floors. Along the way, a few staff members entered and exited, each glancing politely at Michael and Grace without lingering. Finally, they reached the ground floor lobby, a vast, glossy space she hadn't yet seen in full. Andrew led the way across the marble-floored expanse. Sunlight filtered through tall glass panels, and a few clusters of well-dressed visitors conferred by modern sculptures. Grace kept close to Michael's side, acutely aware that any onlooker could be a reporter or someone with a camera phone ready to snap a photo. They reached a quieter wing near the back, where a separate set of doors opened to a private driveway used by Bennett Tech's executives. A sleek black car waited, engine purring softly. The driver nodded as they approached, holding the door open. "What's this?" Grace asked, glancing at Michael. He smiled wryly. "I thought we could get some fresh air. Take a break from the tower. I have a safe place a little ways out of the city. An estate, if you will. Might help you decompress. Assuming your schedule is free?" Grace's tense muscles relaxed a fraction at the idea. Fresh air. That sounds amazing. She'd never have guessed estate would be her next destination, but at least it wasn't another conference room. Andrew spoke up. "I'll stay here to coordinate the final interview details. Keep your phones on. If Miss Grace is to begin orientation tomorrow, she'll just need to be back by the afternoon at the latest." Michael nodded. "We won't vanish for days. Don't worry." A trace of relief crossed Andrew's face. "Enjoy your respite." He turned to Grace. "Remember, you're officially on the company roster, so any urgent updates will come your way too." She managed a small grin. "I'll keep an eye on my messages. Thank you, Andrew." With that, Michael helped her into the car, careful with his injuries. The door closed softly, cocooning them in the cool, leather-scented interior. The driver pulled away from Bennett Tower, merging into city traffic. Grace exhaled, leaning against the seat. The day had been a whirlwind of corporate formality, legalities, and Margaret's watchful scrutiny. Getting out, even briefly, felt like a gift. Michael settled beside her, wincing slightly if the car jolted. "I'm still not at 100%, he admitted, "but I can at least drive out to the estate and walk around the grounds. It's quiet there. Gardens, a small lake, lots of open space." "That sounds perfect," Grace said, imagining a sanctuary away from the relentless hum of city life. They spoke in soft tones as the driver navigated through urban streets, then onto a highway lined with towering buildings that gradually gave way to suburban sprawl. Eventually, signs of city life thinned, replaced by rolling hills and lush greenery. Grace felt her soul breathe again, reminded of the alpine serenity she loved. After about an hour, the car turned onto a winding driveway flanked by tall hedges. Beyond a stone gatehouse, the land opened up into manicured lawns and gently sloping fields. A grand old-world mansion sat at the far end, its stone facade reminiscent of some European estate. Grace stared in awe. She'd known Michael was wealthy, but seeing such sprawling property in person was another matter. The car rolled to a stop in a circular driveway. A caretaker appeared, greeting Michael with a respectful nod. "Welcome back, Mr. Bennett. Everything is in order. Will you be staying the night?" Michael glanced at Grace. "We'll see. For now, just the afternoon, I think." The caretaker nodded and stepped aside, allowing them to enter the mansion's foyer. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, tasteful antique furnishings, though lavish, there was a warmth here absent from the penthouse. Michael led her through a sunlit corridor to a set of French doors opening onto a wide terrace. A gentle breeze greeted them, carrying the scent of flowers. The terrace overlooked a vast garden laid out in geometric patterns. Farther off, Grace spotted a shimmering lake. She inhaled deeply, letting tension slip from her shoulders. "Michael, this is incredible," she murmured, overwhelmed. He gave a faint, fond smile. "It was my parents' idea, originally. A haven away from the city. They wanted me to have a place to run free. But after they passed, Grandmother maintained it mostly as a showpiece. I come here sometimes when I need to think." Grace stepped to the terrace rail, resting her hands on the warm stone. A soft rustling from the garden below revealed colorful flower beds, neatly trimmed hedges, a fountain quietly trickling. "You must have had some happy memories here," she said gently. He came alongside her, gaze distant. "Some. It's beautiful, yes, but I always felt lonely, even here. My parents were gone. Margaret rarely relaxed enough to enjoy it. Mostly I wandered around with tutors or staff." Her heart ached at the image of a young Michael, wealthy yet starved for genuine closeness. She slid her hand over his. "Things can be different now. You can choose how you live." He nodded, fingers lacing with hers. "That's why meeting you changed everything," he admitted in a quiet voice. "You showed me that life doesn't have to be suffocating. Even in the face of danger, there was joy, camaraderie, freedom." A soft flush warmed her cheeks. She squeezed his hand. "I'm glad," she whispered. For a while, they simply stood there, letting the sun and breeze wash over them. A peace settled, so distinct from the tension of boardrooms and bustling offices. Once the initial awe subsided, Grace felt an urge to explore. "Could we walk down to the lake?" she asked. Michael's eyes lit up, a hint of mischief behind them. "Sure, though I might be a bit slower than normal with these ribs. Think you can handle that?" She chuckled. "I'll manage. Let's go." They strolled through the garden, past rows of meticulously shaped hedges and bursts of vibrant blossoms. The caretaker had clearly maintained everything to a high standard. Grace admired the neat stone paths. It felt like a curated version of nature, a stark contrast to the wild freedom of the mountains. Yet there was beauty here too, if one was willing to accept its formality. Reaching the lake, they found a small wooden dock jutting out over the calm water. The surface rippled gently under a mild breeze. Grace inhaled the earthy scent. "It's peaceful," she said, her voice low. Michael carefully lowered himself to sit on the dock's edge, legs dangling above the water. Grace joined him, shoes off, letting her toes dip into the cool lake. She sighed, a sense of relief spreading. "I was worried we'd never find quiet again, with everything that's happening." He nodded. "Moments of quiet are rare in my world, but they do exist if you know where to look." She watched a dragonfly skim the water's surface, shimmering in the sunlight. "Did you ever swim here?" Michael smiled gently. "Yes, though not often enough. I remember wading in with my father once when I was really little. He taught me how to paddle. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to swim for a long time. It felt empty without him." Grace swallowed the knot of empathy forming in her throat. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I wish I'd known you earlier. Maybe I could have—" She cut herself off, aware how ridiculous it sounded. She couldn't change the past. He shifted, facing her. "You're here now," he said, voice warm. "That counts for something." Her heart fluttered at the earnest look in his eyes. She remembered the avalanche of events that had led them here. The slip on the mountain ledge, the snowstorm trapping them in the outpost, the rescue helicopter. Such fragile twists of fate. "Yeah," she agreed gently. "It does." They sat in comfortable silence, feet in the water. Time seemed to slow, the late afternoon sun dipping in the sky. Occasionally Michael pointed out a small bird perched in the reeds or a ripple from a fish beneath the surface. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, careful of his injury, savoring a moment of closeness. But inevitably, reality crept in. As the sun sank lower, Michael sighed. "We should head back soon. Andrew will be calling, and you have orientation in the morning. Plus, the talk show producers might want a preliminary call." Grace grimaced. "Right. The real world awaits." He pressed a quick, tender kiss to her hair. "We'll find ways to come back here, I promise." Her breath caught at the softness of the gesture. She slid an arm gently around him, mindful of his side. "I'd like that," she whispered, feeling a surge of warmth at the idea of returning to this peaceful refuge, perhaps for many more afternoons to come. And so they rose, strolling back to the mansion where the car was waiting. As the driver took them back toward the city, Grace peered out the window, watching the estate's gates recede in the rear-view mirror. A part of her longed to remain there, cocooned in tranquility with Michael, away from corporate machinations, away from Margaret's piercing gaze. But she knew the battles weren't over. She would face orientation, press interviews, and the labyrinth of hidden agendas that swirled around Bennett Tech. Yet bolstered by that quiet interlude by the lake, she felt a renewed determination. She would stand her ground, not just for Michael's sake, but for her own. Perhaps in doing so she could help him reclaim more of those moments of genuine peace, moments that hinted at a life worth living beyond the shadows of power and legacy. And as city lights glimmered on the horizon, Grace steeled herself. The storm of publicity was only just beginning, but she would face it, guided by the resilience that mountains and Michael had taught her. Because in the grand scheme of battles won and lost, holding on to one's true self might be the greatest victory of all. A soft drizzle tapped against the penthouse windows the next morning, creating a hushed, gray ambiance that mirrored the subdued mood within. Grace stood at the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing her orientation schedule on a company-issued tablet. Her official first day as Bennett Technologies' risk and outdoor specialist had arrived, complete with a half-dozen back-to-back meetings in the HR department and with various team leads. She felt a pang of nerves, wondering how her practical knowledge of mountains and wilderness would translate in these polished corporate corridors. Michael, dressed in a neatly pressed shirt and slacks, strolled into the kitchen with a slight limp from his still tender ribs. His hair was damp from the shower, and a whiff of his cologne mingled with the coffee aroma. He regarded her with a gentle smile. "Ready for the big day?" he teased, though his voice carried sympathy. She let out a breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Then, summoning a faint smirk, she added, "I'm used to dealing with unpredictable terrain. Let's hope your HR folks are easier than hidden crevasses." Michael chuckled, gingerly touching his bandaged side as if even laughter was a bit of a strain. "They'll ask you for your signatures on confidentiality forms, run you through codes of conduct, and do an ID card photo. It's standard procedure, I promise." He retrieved his own tablet from the counter, glancing at notifications. "Meanwhile, I have a meeting with R&D about our upcoming software launch. Then Margaret wants to see me about finalizing the talk show appearance. She's determined to get it scheduled for next week." Grace's grip on her coffee mug tightened. "Next week?" Her pulse quickened at the thought of facing a live audience so soon. He nodded, offering a reassuring look. "We'll get media coaching, remember? And we can still say no if the conditions aren't right. Don't let Margaret rush you." She appreciated his steady concern. "I'll keep that in mind." Finishing her coffee, she set the mug in the sink. "Let's do this." Together, they rode the private elevator down to the floors where Bennett Tech's administrative departments were located. The soft jazz piping through the elevator speakers did little to calm Grace's fluttering nerves, but Michael's warm presence at her side helped. When the doors slid open, Andrew was already waiting, immaculate in a charcoal suit. "Morning," he greeted, tapping his phone screen. "Grace, I'll walk you to HR. Michael, your R&D meeting is in conference room 12 on the 41st floor. They're waiting for you." Michael glanced at his watch. "Right. I'll see you later, Grace. Lunch?" She offered a small, grateful nod. "Yes, please. That'd be great." They parted with a brief squeeze of hands, casual but comforting. Then Andrew whisked Grace along a corridor lined with motivational posters featuring Bennett Tech slogans. Employees passed, some offering polite smiles or curious glances. "Word must have spread that I'm on staff now," Grace thought, recalling the hush of speculation that greeted her first brief visit to these floors. Andrew guided her into a modern reception area where a cheerful HR coordinator named Felicia greeted Grace. "Welcome, Miss Grace. We're so excited to officially have you on board." She motioned to a side door. "Step right this way, we'll get you all set up." For the next hour, Grace navigated a whirlwind of paperwork and digital forms. She filled out basic personal information, confirmed her new corporate email address, and took an official ID photo under unflattering fluorescent lights. Felicia rattled off details about Bennett Tech's benefits, from health coverage to a potential retirement plan. The dizzying array of corporate jargon left Grace's head spinning. She'd never in her wildest dreams envisioned herself with a 401k structure or stock option potential. Yet another form demanded her signature for proprietary information and inventions, which made her eyebrows climb. "I won't be inventing anything," Grace joked nervously. Felicia laughed good-naturedly. "We issue these to all employees, just in case. Technically, if you contributed ideas that led to new product features, maybe related to a safety app or something, this clarifies the intellectual property. It's standard." Grace nodded, though her stomach flipped at how complicated everything felt. She glanced at the contract's fine print, recalling her father's old warnings about signing documents without reading thoroughly. But Andrew had promised the legal team had folded in her requested changes, so she pressed her pen to the line with a mix of trust and lingering caution. At last, Felicia smiled broadly. "All set. Your ID card should be printed shortly. Let me show you to your designated workspace and introduce you to some of the team." Grace managed a polite grin, exhaustion creeping in from the barrage of new information. "Thank you, Felicia. Lead the way." Back at the consultant's cubicle she'd glimpsed days ago, Grace found a small sign with her name already affixed. A co-worker with bright red hair, Bethany, hurried over. "Hey, I'm so glad you're really here," she said excitedly. "We put out a little plant for you, see? Indeed, a modest succulent perched on a corner of the desk. Figured you might like a touch of green. Touched by the gesture, Grace smiled. That's very thoughtful. Thank you, Bethany. Bethany introduced her to a few other staff members, Joseph from Travel Coordination, Anita from Security Liaison. The small group seemed genuinely friendly, curious about Grace's background but not overly prying. They asked practical questions about wilderness safety, and Grace offered basic tips. It's surreal to be explaining hiking boots and layering techniques in a corporate office, she admitted with a laugh. But I guess some employees do field work in remote places, right? Joseph nodded fervently. Yes, Bennett Tech has installations around the world. Some are in rugged locations, like an environmental research unit in Alaska, or a philanthropic outreach center in mountainous regions. We occasionally send teams there. Having your expertise could really help reduce risks. A spark of interest lit in Grace. So I won't be just a figurehead. She liked the idea of making a real contribution, maybe planning specialized training sessions or preparing checklists for staff traveling to challenging terrains. A wave of relief mingled with excitement. Perhaps this corporate role won't be as empty as I feared. Eventually, Bethany pointed out a small break lounge. You can always grab coffee or tea here if you don't feel like going up to the main cafe. The cafe on the 30th floor is bigger, but this one's cozy. Grace thanked her and decided a quick tea break was in order before meeting Michael for lunch. She found the lounge unoccupied except for a single figure leaning against the countertop, a tall man in a tailored suit scanning something on his phone. At her entrance, he glanced up, his gaze lingering a fraction too long. He was older than Michael, with salt and pepper hair and a coolly appraising air. "Morning," Grace offered politely, opening a cupboard in search of a tea bag. "Morning," he returned. His voice was cultured, measured. "You must be Grace, the new consultant everyone's whispering about." She tried not to bristle at the mention of whispering. "Yes, that's me," he set his phone aside. "I'm Strickland, a member of the board. We met briefly in the boardroom after your rescue, though I doubt you remember me in that crowd." He offered a thin, formal smile. She recalled the man, stern-faced, wearing pinstripes. "Yes, of course. I remember." Strickland leaned forward slightly. "I was curious. How are you finding Bennett Tech so far? Adjusting well?" His tone was polite, but there was a watchfulness in his eyes that made her cautious. "It's all very new," she admitted, selecting a chamomile packet. "But people have been kind, and I'm eager to contribute." He nodded slowly. "Yes, we appreciate your presence. I hope you realize the significance of your role in stabilizing Mr. Bennett's image, though I'm sure you're not just here for appearances." She recognized a subtle undertone. "So he's testing me." "I'm committed to helping where I can, beyond any PR narrative," she replied calmly, meeting his gaze. Strickland's cool smile remained. "Good. We need clear-headed individuals around Michael. He's prone to impulses, like that ill-timed trip of his." Grace stiffened, sensing an implied critique of Michael's personal choices. "He's been handling a lot of pressure. Sometimes people need a break." "True," Strickland said mildly, but his eyes glinted. "Just be sure you keep his best interests, and the company's best interests aligned. If you see him wavering, steer him back on course. The board has high expectations for him." The subtext, "Don't let him run off again." Grace swallowed a flicker of annoyance. "Michael's more than capable," she said, forcing a measured tone. "But yes, I'll do my part." "Excellent," Strickland murmured, retrieving his phone. "Welcome again, Miss Grace. I look forward to seeing how you shape our safety protocols." With that, he left, footsteps echoing down the corridor. Grace exhaled slowly. What was that? A benign welcome or a veiled threat? She sensed the same corporate tension she'd felt with Margaret. Calculated politeness, watchers weighing her every move. I can't let them intimidate me. Taking her tea, she returned to her desk. A message from Michael awaited. Done with R&D soon. Lunch in the executive dining area? She typed back, perfect. See you in 15. The executive dining area sat high above the city, all glass and steel, offering panoramic views and high-end cuisine. It resembled a five-star restaurant rather than a workplace cafeteria. Grace arrived first, feeling a pang of self-consciousness among the suits. She found a table by the window, scanning the skyline while waiting. A few minutes later, Michael appeared, searching the crowd until his gaze landed on her. The tension in his features eased. He wove through the tables, wincing slightly if someone brushed his injured side. "Hey," he greeted, sliding into the seat across from her. "How's your first morning as a corporate consultant?" She laughed softly. "Intense. Lots of forms. A whirlwind of introductions. Then I ran into Strickland in the break lounge." Michael's face darkened. "What did he say?" "Nothing too overt, but he basically implied I should keep you from straying off the path, like I'm your babysitter." Her annoyance must have bled through because Michael reached across the small table to rest a hand on hers. "Strickland's one of the board members who sees me as a figurehead to be controlled," he said quietly. "He might try to leverage your presence, thinking you can influence me. Don't let him push you around." She nodded, feeling a surge of protective anger on his behalf. "I won't." A waiter approached, took their orders, light fare for Michael given his healing injuries, and retreated. The hush of conversation enveloped them, other executives dining or meeting casually. Grace realized she stuck out in her simpler attire but decided not to fuss over it. She was here for lunch with Michael, not to impress the corporate crowd. Michael leaned forward, voice soft. "I talked to my grandmother about the morning show. She's pressing for an appearance next Monday. That's less than a week away." Grace's stomach flipped. "That soon?" He nodded, lips curving in a sympathetic half-smile. "I don't want to rush you, but she insists the sooner we clarify the story, the less chance for tabloids to run wild. Andrew arranged a media coaching session for tomorrow. The host is known to be friendly, but they'll still ask personal questions, like about our time in the mountains." She swallowed, recalling that snowbound outpost, the intimacy of shared fears and revelations. "I'll do my best to keep it dignified. I just worry about crossing lines, like talking about your private struggles or your family's tragedies. That's not mine to share." Michael's gaze softened. "Thank you for being so considerate. Let's just keep the focus on the rescue, how we survived. We don't owe them every detail about who we are." A faint tension shadowed his eyes. "Though they'll try, trust me." The waiter returned with their plates, a grilled chicken salad for Michael, a fresh pasta dish for Grace. They ate in quiet moments, exchanging looks that seemed to say, "We're in this together." Occasionally, a passing executive paused to greet Michael politely. He acknowledged them, but skillfully steered them away with a few words, protecting Grace from further scrutiny. Halfway through the meal, Grace's phone vibrated with a new message. She glanced down to see a text from an unknown number. "Watch your step, mountain girl. Not everyone here is your ally. Some storms can't be outclimbed." She felt her heart stutter. Carefully, she showed Michael the message, his brow furrowed, anger flaring. "Someone's messing with you, possibly a board member or a staffer with some agenda." Grace's stomach churned. "Why would they threaten me, though? I'm just a consultant." Michael grimaced. "In this environment, anyone close to me is a target for manipulation. If they think you have influence, they might try intimidation, or sow distrust." He frowned at her phone. "Block that number. Let Andrew know. We'll trace it if we can." She nodded, forcing her pulse to settle. This is corporate life? Anonymous threats? She reminded herself that fear wouldn't help. The best defense was to remain calm and seek allies, like Michael, Andrew, even the decent employees she'd met. She pocketed the phone, not wanting to lose her appetite entirely. They finished lunch quietly, shadows of worry cast over their conversation. By the time they parted, Michael heading to another meeting, Grace returning to her new workspace, The sense of looming danger hovered in her thoughts. "Be certain you know which is which," Margaret had cautioned. Was that a hint about real treachery in these halls? As she settled at her desk, reviewing a stack of company travel checklists, Grace felt a renewed determination. Whoever had sent that cryptic text underestimated her resilience. She'd faced freezing storms on a mountainside, risked her life to save Michael. No corporate schemer or whispered threat would scare her off. The job might be new terrain, but she'd climb it with the same grit that had kept her alive in the high country. Still, the tension was undeniable. 1 week until the morning show, whispers among the board, a swirl of rumors, and now ominous messages on her phone. Some storms can't be outclimbed. Perhaps not. But Grace knew one truth from her guiding days. Even the fiercest blizzard could be navigated if you kept your footing and refused to yield. She inhaled slowly, grounded herself, and began drafting a training plan for Bennett Tech's traveling staff. High above her, in the executive offices, she imagined Margaret and the board quietly orchestrating the next moves. Down the corridors, colleagues typed away, oblivious to the undercurrents. And somewhere in the city, rivals or saboteurs might be weaving plots. But I won't falter, Grace told herself, not when her own integrity and Michael's fragile hope depended on it. In the end, it was always about taking one careful step after another, trusting her instincts and bracing for the unforeseen. The path might be precarious, but she was a climber after all, and as she'd proven on the mountain, she refused to let fear dictate her route. Days zipped past in a blur of meetings, media coaching, and the cautious dance of corporate politics. Grace practiced answering hypothetical interview questions under the watchful eyes of Bennett Tech's PR team, learning how to pivot away from invasive topics, how to keep the conversation on the rescue story and her new role as a consultant. Every night, she collapsed into bed at the penthouse with a sense of exhaustion, only to wake the next morning feeling the pressure of the looming TV appearance. Michael, for his part, split his time between urgent board duties and gentle reassurance. Whenever Grace felt her nerves spike, he'd pull her aside with a quiet, steady word or a simple touch of her hand anchoring her. They still found time to talk about more than work, like the best trails in her hometown or the silly fact that Michael had never learned to properly pitch a tent, a fact that earned a smirk from Grace. But those moments of ease were fleeting, overshadowed by a building sense that something was about to break. One day before the scheduled interview, Grace received another anonymous text. "Curiosity can cost you everything. Watch your footing." She showed Michael, whose jaw tensed with quiet rage. Andrew promised the security team would investigate further, but given how large Bennett Tech was and how many outside contractors or board connections existed, finding the culprit wouldn't be easy. At Margaret's insistence, Grace kept the threats discreet. "No need to alarm the entire board," Margaret had said, her voice stiff. "It might be an overzealous staffer. Focus on the public image for now." Grace couldn't help feeling that Margaret was downplaying the risk to avoid unwanted scandal. Despite the undercurrents of menace, the day of the morning talk show arrived like a thunderclap. Grace woke before dawn, heart pounding as she recalled the tight schedule. They'd be picked up by a Bennett Tech car, escorted to the network studio, mic'd up, and ushered on stage for a live segment. Her palms felt clammy even after a hot shower. Michael, equally tense but practiced in controlling his demeanor, greeted her with a small but determined smile in the penthouse living room. "We've got this," he said simply. She nodded, remembering the avalanche of training tips from PR. Keep answers concise, be authentic, speak to the positive. But none of that training eased the flutter in her stomach. When the black SUV pulled up, they climbed in with Andrew, who carried a folder of last-minute notes and one of Bennett Tech's senior PR specialists. The studio stood in a gleaming high-rise downtown, thrumming with early morning energy. Inside, staff hurried about with headsets and clipboards, while bright lights illuminated a modern set where cameras and large screens were poised for action. The show's assistant producer greeted them, all business-like warmth. She led Grace and Michael to a backstage area, away from prying eyes, while the PR specialist smoothed out final details with the host's team. They perched on tall stools in the green room, a swirl of nerves constricting Grace's throat. A makeup artist touched up her face, smoothing the faint shadows under her eyes. Michael fidgeted with his bandaged ribs, acknowledging that he still felt twinges of pain. Finally, the producer returned, beckoning them to follow. "And we're live in 3, 2, 1, came a stage manager's voice as Grace and Michael stepped onto the brightly lit set. The morning show's host, Allison Glenn, a charismatic woman in a jewel-toned blazer, welcomed them with an effusive smile. Cameras panned over, capturing the audience's applause. Grace's heart hammered. She'd never faced such bright lights outside of a rescue helicopter. "Good morning, America," Allison began, beaming into the lens. "We have a very special segment for you today. Joining us is Michael Bennett, heir to the Bennett Technologies empire, and of course the man who recently survived a harrowing mountain ordeal. Alongside him is the brave guide who rescued him from a deadly storm, Miss Grace." The host turned to them, her eyes warm with curiosity. "Thank you both for being here." Michael offered a polite nod. "Thank you for having us." Grace managed to speak past her dryness of mouth. "I appreciate the opportunity to clear the air." Allison gestured to a large screen behind them, which displayed images of the mountain range and a smaller inset photo of Grace and Michael stepping off the rescue helicopter. "So, Michael, let's start with you. Why did you choose to go climbing during a crucial period for your company?" He took a steady breath. Grace recognized the sign of his practiced media training. "It was meant to be a short personal break. I love the outdoors, and I wanted time to think without the noise of the corporate world. Unfortunately, the weather turned far worse than anticipated. The storm was life-threatening. That's where Grace came in." Allison's attention shifted to Grace. "And you, Miss Grace, how did you end up guiding Michael Bennett, and what really happened out there in that blizzard?" Grace's pulse pounded, but she reminded herself to speak plainly, from the heart. "I'm a local mountain guide by trade. Michael approached me, and I agreed to take him on a route that, under normal circumstances, was manageable. But the storm blew in unexpectedly. He slipped on an icy ledge, nearly falling to a ravine. We only survived by finding an old ranger's outpost. We spent days there rationing supplies until a helicopter spotted us." The host nodded, eyes shining with that blend of fascination morning show audiences love. "That must have been terrifying. Did you ever fear you wouldn't make it?" Grace allowed a small, wry smile. "Absolutely. But in the mountains, you learn to focus on what you can control. Staying warm, finding shelter, looking out for each other. Michael was brave too. He never gave up." Michael offered Grace a grateful look before Allison pressed on. "There's been speculation about your relationship. Some tabloids claimed a whirlwind romance. Others suggested business motives. How do you respond to these rumors?" Grace felt the question like a prick of cold air. She glanced at Michael. His expression remained composed, though she sensed the flicker of tension. "Truthfully," Grace said, "there was no master plan. Our bond grew from shared survival. I'm now a consultant at Bennett Tech, helping with safety protocols because that's what I do, guide people safely." Allison's brow arched, clearly enjoying the human interest angle. "So no romance on the mountaintop?" Michael intervened gently, sparing Grace the awkwardness. "We formed a deep connection in that crisis. It's personal, like a friendship forged in fire. I respect Grace immensely. For now, we're just grateful to be alive and working together." Allison, seeing she wouldn't get a sensational confession, pivoted. "Well, that's lovely. Let's talk about Bennett Tech. Michael, your company has soared under your grandmother's leadership. How have you handled the transition back into corporate life after this near-death experience?" Michael's face tightened slightly, but he answered calmly. It's been an adjustment. My grandmother and the board rely on me, and I'm committed to my responsibilities. But this experience reminded me that life isn't solely about board meetings. I hope to bring a refreshed perspective to Bennett Tech, balancing innovation with well-being. Allison nodded, a diplomatic smile curving her lips. Miss Grace, as a newcomer to big business, how do you find this corporate world? Grace breathed a quiet laugh. It's a different landscape, no less challenging than climbing, honestly. But I see it as another environment to navigate. Learn the rules, watch your step, keep going. I hope to bring real outdoor safety knowledge here. I want to ensure no staff or researchers face hazards without proper training. The host smiled brightly. That's admirable. And finally, what do you both want people to take away from your story? Michael caught Grace's eye. His words came soft but strong. That we're all human, no matter our position or wealth. Sometimes stepping away from the noise is necessary to find clarity, but we should do it responsibly. And that people like Grace, everyday heroes, can save lives in ways no technology can replace. Grace felt warmth flood her chest. She added, hardships can form unexpected bonds. We can be strangers one day, allies the next. If sharing our experience inspires someone to help another or to respect nature's power, then I think this story has a purpose. Allison beamed, turning to the camera. What a beautiful message. Thank you both for coming on and shedding light on the real story behind those sensational headlines. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back with more after the break. As the segment ended and applause echoed in the studio, Grace exhaled shakily. The bright lights dimmed slightly, and a stagehand guided them off set. Michael's hand found hers, giving it a brief squeeze. You did great, he whispered, relief evident in his eyes. She smiled, her heart still hammering. So did you. Backstage, Andrew and a PR representative congratulated them, offering hushed excitement that the interview had gone smoothly. That was perfect. Sincere but not too revealing, the PR specialist gushed. Social media is already reacting positively. Michael, though tired-looking, nodded in thanks. Grace caught a reflection of them in a mirror. She and Michael, side by side, a strange duo forged by nature's tempest. We survived the on-air storm, too. They left the studio to find the building's lobby abuzz with staff and visitors. A few recognized Michael, greeting him politely. Others whispered, craning to see Grace. She ignored the murmurs, focusing on the safe presence of Michael's hand lightly on her elbow, guiding her to the waiting car. But just as they neared the exit, her phone buzzed again. She tensed, pulling it out. Another unknown message glowed on the screen. You might fool the cameras, but not everyone is blind. Your next misstep will be your last. Her blood chilled. She showed Michael. His face darkened. Enough, he muttered. He flagged Andrew, who'd walked behind them. We need security to trace these messages immediately. This is a direct threat. Andrew's expression turned grim. Agreed. This can't go unaddressed. They climbed into the SUV, hearts pounding. During the ride back to Bennett Tower, Andrew fired off calls to the in-house cyber team, ordering a deep trace on the texts. Grace stared out the window, unsettled. The interview had felt like a victory. Now a menacing shadow threatened to eclipse it. Who wants to harm us or manipulate us, and why? Michael tried to soothe her. We'll find the source. My grandmother won't let a threat slide, especially if it jeopardizes the company's image. Grace gave a shaky nod. I'm not scared for me exactly, she whispered, but I fear for you and for what this means about the undercurrents here. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. We face it together. When they returned to Bennett Tower, they went straight to the executive security suite. Margaret was already there, posture rigid, scowling at a security chief who stammered about the difficulty of tracing burner phones. Strickland stood in the corner, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Another board member, McAllister, frowned at the floor. Margaret's gaze snapped to Grace and Michael. More texts? Show me. She snatched Grace's phone, scanning the latest threat. Her lips tightened into a thin line. Preposterous. Someone is sabotaging us from within, I'm certain. They want to sow fear, maybe force Michael into compliance, or discredit Grace. We can't let them succeed. Strickland interjected smoothly. We'll double down on security protocols, but we should be cautious about going public with these threats. Bad for investor confidence. Perhaps keep it internal. Michael's temper flared. So bury it? So no one knows we're threatened? That's not a solution. Margaret shot him a warning glare. We have to be strategic, Michael. Calm. We'll root out the culprit quietly. Grace's pulse hammered. I refuse to cower. If someone's trying to drive me out, they can't succeed unless I give in. A tiny hint of respect flashed in Margaret's eyes, though she remained tense. Exactly. Stand firm. We'll find them. In the meantime, you have the board's backing, officially or otherwise. Andrew cleared his throat. The timing suggests someone is angry about the successful interview. Our share price actually ticked upward after the broadcast. Perhaps a rival fears Michael's renewed public goodwill. Strickland nodded curtly, though his expression stayed inscrutable. Grace couldn't shake the sense that he was sizing her up, the same way he had in the break lounge. But if he was behind this, he disguised it well. The security chief promised to intensify investigations, coordinate with law enforcement if necessary. Once the meeting ended, the tension in Margaret's private office soared off the charts. Michael placed a calming hand on Grace's shoulder, ushering her out into the corridor. Andrew lingered behind to finalize security steps, while Strickland and McAllister departed without a word. Grace released a shaky breath as soon as the door closed behind them. What a day. That interview felt like a victory. But now, these threats overshadow it. Michael guided her down the hall, voice hushed. Threats or not, your composure on that show was incredible. We'll handle this new storm, I promise. She nodded, trying to muster courage. I just want to do my job, help where I can. Why can't it be that simple? A bittersweet smile crossed his lips. Because Bennett Tech is an empire, and every empire has conspirators lurking. But you're no ordinary consultant, Grace. You've shown them your strength. They're worried. They stopped by a tall window overlooking the city. Gray clouds lingered, reflecting the unsettled mood. Grace let her forehead rest against the cool glass, recalling the wind-swept peaks of her home. In those mountains, threats were tangible. Blizzards, avalanches, steep cliffs. Here, dangers hid behind phones, boardroom smiles, untraceable messages. But she wasn't alone. Michael's presence at her side reminded her of the unwavering ally she'd found. The memory of that outpost firelight, the hush of the snowstorm, flickered in her mind. That shared resilience still bound them. Turning to face him, she mustered a quiet, determined smile. We won't let them break us, or twist this story into something ugly. Michael's eyes warmed. No, we won't. And once we unmask whoever's behind these threats... He paused, chest tightening with anger. We'll show them they chose the wrong people to intimidate. By evening, the city glowed under a subdued sunset. As Grace sat in the penthouse living room, scanning an email about her next day's schedule, Michael sank onto the couch beside her. She noticed the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. He'd endured a board briefing, a security update, countless calls with investors buoyed by their successful interview. Sometimes she wondered how he carried it all. She tucked her phone away and scooted closer. He gave her a worn smile, leaning his head back against the cushions. So, how do you feel after your first official media event and the subsequent drama? Grace considered. Oddly empowered, despite the threats. I was terrified to do live TV, but we told our story, not some twisted rumor. That feels like a win. The threats scare me, but I refuse to let them define me. Michael's hand found hers. That's what I admire about you, this unyielding courage. I just wish you weren't forced to show it in boardrooms and studios. She glanced at him, heart stirring. Maybe someday we'll return to a real mountain together, one that's not overshadowed by all this, a trek on our own terms. His eyes lit up, as though picturing a future free from corporate storms. "I'd like that," he said softly. A beat passed, and then his gaze turned serious. "We might not see the end of these threats soon, but we'll strengthen security. And once I recover fully, maybe we can track down more about who gains from stirring chaos." She nodded, letting her head rest on his shoulder. "And in the meantime, I'll keep guiding us through this corporate wilderness, because that's what I do, right?" She joked lightly. He chuckled, the sound warm against the hush of the penthouse. Couldn't have a better guide. They stayed like that, letting the city lights twinkle beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Neither spoke of the menacing texts or the uncertain future. For now, they took comfort in each other's presence, feeling like they'd carved out a tiny refuge in the midst of an empire's swirling currents. As the night deepened, Grace made her way to her guest room, exhaustion pulling her under. In her dreams, the city's skyline merged with jagged mountain peaks, a single vast landscape of challenges. She trekked across them, Michael by her side, forging a path through hidden threats and watchful eyes. The journey felt endless, but she held on to a stubborn hope that beyond each ridge lay a clearer horizon. When morning arrived again, Grace awoke to a new day of responsibilities at Bennett Tech. The immediate crisis, her interview, the rescue story, might be contained, but she sensed fresh trials would emerge. Rivalries, the overshadowing presence of Margaret Bennett, whoever was sending threats, lurking behind anonymity. Yet her heart held steady. She was, after all, a climber at her core, shaped by adversity and the raw, honest power of nature. And so she dressed for work, steeling herself for another round of orientation tasks and strategy sessions. The future remained uncertain, but her resolve was sure. She'd stand beside Michael, navigate each new storm, and guard the bond they'd forged against all who sought to twist or exploit it. Whatever came next, be it sabotage, cunning boardroom plays, or deeper emotional entanglements, Grace was ready to climb. Because if life had taught her anything, it was that true guides never abandoned the path halfway. They pressed on, step by careful step, until the summit was in view, even if the summit was a place neither of them had ever seen before. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.